That's fine.
We read.
Because it's going to be.
The meeting of the Public Safety Committee is now called to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Spencer.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
Present.
Chairman Kennedy.
Here.
8 present. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have several items before the committee here today. We have Resolution 141 that is sponsored by Alderwoman Sharon Tyus. We will take up that item first. She is not a member of the committee. And as we normally do, we take up items usually from members who are not on the committee first. We had a slight confusion in relationship to the resolution. So I can clarify it for both those who are here and our committee members. First, we'd like to thank all of those who've shown up to talk about and testify on Resolution 141 and any of the other bills that we have up today. It is both our pleasure to welcome you here. We thank you for coming out and taking time out of your busy life to come here and to testify and give your thoughts to this Board of Aldermen. Believe us that your opinions and ideas do have impact upon decision-making that our committee does as it relates to various resolutions and bills. Don't think that your voices are not heard. The way the resolutions work are resolutions that are introduced at the Board of Aldermen can be passed by the entire board on the floor when it is first introduced, or sent to a committee for a discussion as to whether or not they should be passed by the full board. Resolution 141 was introduced at the board and immediately referred to this committee. It was not passed by the full board. So technically, the discussion here today by this committee is whether or not the resolution has merit enough to be reconsidered by the full board and finally passed. This committee could vote to pass the bill out with a no recommendation, or a do not pass recommendation, or a do pass recommendation. It has those various options. Based upon what we hear today, this committee will make its decision. So your discussion, and I know we have a lot of people have a lot of experiences that will be of benefit, but the resolution has not been fully passed by the entire board, and therefore getting into the details, the very, very, minute details of each of your experiences is not technically what the committee is here to hear today. What it needs to hear from people is whether or not you feel this resolution should be sent back to the full board for its final passage. Now, we know you've had experiences, and those experiences give you the information as to why you think that we should pass this out to the full board, and we'd like to hear that. We will limit the discussions from the public, as we do, to about 2 minutes. I think the sponsor of the bill has informed some of you that I think she told him 1 minute.
I had told, I was discussing it with you, Mr. Chairman, because I never give out any more information without being more positive, since we already had the hiccup, okay? Right. So I was going to say it in my speech.
Oh, in your
right.
Okay, well.
But you're doing just fine.
Thank you. So that is what our discussion is here today, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts as to whether or not this should be sent back to the full board. The way this works, we usually give the sponsor, according to the board's rules, the sponsor talks about their bill first, or their resolution first, giving the background and the reasons for it. Then after that, the sponsor has specific individuals you'd like to come forward. We will take them after the sponsor speaks. And then after that, we will open it up to those who have signed the list. And we have a number of people who have signed the list, and we'll call them in the order that they have signed. So again, thank you for being here. And if you have opinions that are different from somebody else, that's okay, but we do not have to be insulting to each other about it. Let's try to deal with each other with some respect. We know we're dealing with sensitive issues that might have been on our last nerve, but we can talk about our passions without being insulting to one another. So with that, we'd like to open this up for the sponsor of the bill of the resolution to talk about Resolution 141. Alderwoman Tyus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to come before the committee today. I also want to thank the people who showed up to talk either for or against the resolution. Differing minds are always important to me because I'm often the differing mind at the Board of Aldermen, so I appreciate when people have different ideas. I purposely did not try to pass the resolution on the floor of the Board of Aldermen because I do believe that the committee was an appropriate place to discuss these topics, okay? And I thought we had a diverse group of people that was on this committee, and so everybody would get a fair chance to have things that they thought weigh in on the decision whether we should pass this or not. So I did know that maybe I could get it passed on the floor, but I did not want to do that. Saying all of that, I want to tell you that I wrote and introduced Resolution 141 after watching and reading about the interaction between the police, protesters, and some of the business community after the Shockley verdict. It's a hearing. It's not a bashing of the police. I want fact-finding. I'm very much supportive, as most of you all know, about the facts and the rules. When you hear things that are reported, sometimes they're just not true. I've been down here long enough that sometimes the press gets it right, sometimes they get it a little wrong. It also sometimes comes from who's reporting and what their thoughts are. So I started out writing this just really wanting the police chief to come before us and answer some questions because we've had a major change in how we are policed as far as who is in control of the police. For many years, when I was the chair of public safety back in the 2001, it was the police were under the state. We passed a law, the police are under civil service now in us, and when we did that, I was not supportive of it. And thought that it had a lot of things that need to be worked out. We've since found out that's been true. Some of the things we didn't think through, like we don't have a police board, but it's a fact. And so we have to deal with the rules as lawmaking entity as to how the rules are. And so as the police are under civil service, it occurred to me that the citizens of St. Louis, which we had told that we would have more control over the police and we would be able to save money. They didn't have a police board if they had a problem with the police. So now, if you have a problem with the police, you have to report it to the police. I think that that's kind of troublesome for me. I really would love to see this committee maybe form some kind of group, the chair maybe could appoint, and then we could have maybe monthly meetings so the citizens could have somebody, and who better than us until something else is set up as legislative members that represent all diverse parts of the city. So that's just one of my reasons that I was writing this. But I really wanted this committee to hear. What I came to find out is that as I talked to people about what happened, because I have not been a protester. In my years, many years ago, I probably would have been a protester. When I got elected to the board, one of the things Congressman Bill Clay Sr. said to me is, Sharon, bring your protests inside. Write up bills, write up resolutions, do inquiries. So that is me. Protesting is asking the questions, not to hear a preconceived notion of what I believe, but to have fact-finding. And the only way you have fact-finding is you hear from all sides. I wanted to bring some of the people who were out protesting in the business community, because I started to read. I was really troubled when I read. I go to Pie Pizza. I'm not an Emo's Pizza person. I love Pie Pizza. I live close to it. I go there often. And when I read what had happened with Mr. Summers, I was really like, my goodness, and then they talked about some boycotting of his establishments. That was alarming to me. I read in the paper that the police were out I know that the protesters were supposed to be saying whose streets are our street, and I understood what that was. I didn't understand the police out marching saying whose streets are streets. There are no police streets to me. These are citizen streets, and so that was offensive to me. I've said it on the floor many times, and I'll say it again. I am much more probably a pro-police person. I call the police on you. I believe in the police. I work with them. But I do not believe anybody is beyond questioning and correcting. And that's with your children, your spouses, your family members. If you really love somebody, then when they're getting out of order, to me, or you care about this community, you have to say you're out of order. Some of the things that I was hearing reported, I thought was out of order. But then I said to myself, Sharon, you don't know if this really happened or not. So why don't you write a resolution? Let's bring in different sides. Let's hear what's going on. And then maybe we can make a better decision about if we need to make some changes in our own laws, because now that they aren't under civil service, we are the people that need to be making a lot of the things to tell them how, a lot of the rules and regulations to tell them how they should be policing our community. I know the police tend not to want you to do that. That's with your children, your spouse, or anything else. When you've had unfettered power, a lot of power, you don't want people to bring it in. But I see this city being a powder keg. I love the city of St. Louis. I underwent racial gerrymandering at this, I'm very bored and came back because I love the city. And so my reason is of sponsoring this resolution is so that we can bring people in and they can answer questions. It occurred to me that I think of the police as protect and serve. That's how I grew up. Maybe that's not how they are taught in the police academy anymore. How do the police think that they're supposed to police the protesters? What do they believe are protesters' First Amendment rights? Where are they getting this? These are all the questions I, as an attorney, had that I didn't think was answered. So I don't know how many, maybe some of you might have better answers, but I didn't, and I really would have liked to hear it from the top. That's our acting police chief. I found in previous years when I dealt with the police that sometimes the police didn't know the laws or the rules. Many times I've dealt with a police chief and I told them, I called the police about something, they would say, well, that's not the law, Alderwoman, and then I would have to email over, at that time not email, fax over to them, our rules and regulations, laws or whatever, and after a while they would laugh and say, we didn't know this. So sometimes people are maybe doing things because they understand it to be different. A lot of it comes from the top. That's why I asked for the police, acting police chief to come and answer questions. Again, it's not for police bashing, but it's for a police accountability. And so I'm hoping that this committee, after hearing a few of the people testify what has happened, would agree to pass this board bill out with a due pass recommendation. I was just telling my reason, and okay. And I did I brought several people who I wanted you to hear that I had invited to tell, and I know everybody has a story, and the chairman has done a really good job in explaining that if we get this passed, you can come back and do this, but I do think that you ought to hear some of the reasons why out of their mouths, because I wasn't there. So I can't give firsthand report of what happened, but some of the people were there, including some of our very own members were there. So I invited a couple of our members to also testify as to what happened. And then hopefully that you will see, and you know that you all that know me know that I'm pretty fair, even if it's not on my side. If I don't think it's right, I'll say that it's not right. But I think this is a good way to interact with the police. And I see that the judges jumped ship yesterday and had a hearing, and I'm gonna have to talk to Judge Edwards because he used my very words to say, at the end of my resolution, to say words matters, and that's how he ended his article. He is my constituent, so, but they actually had a sit down, which is historic in that judges don't come off the bench and do this kind of thing. Our city is going to have to address these matters, and that's why I wanted to have a hearing before this committee. And if you would please, I would want to know if Alderwoman Megan Green would want to be the first person. Okay, and then Alderman Gunther, and then I have some other people that I'll call up after that, okay?
Okay. We can bring up Alderwoman Green. I believe she has seniority over Gunther.
I said her first. Yes, that's right. I get it. He was making sure you kept your place, but I didn't do that, Alderman Gunther.
Thank you, Alderwoman Tyus, and thank you to members of the Public Safety Committee. I've been out at nearly every protest since they've started, and this go around, and I'll speak to a couple of things from 2014 as well. I'm not going to speak to everything that I've witnessed, but I want to highlight a couple of particular instances that I think definitely warrant having the acting police chief come in front of us and kind of explain some of the protest response. The first issue that I really want to talk about is the night of that night after the verdict was announced, and we were in the Central West End. a large group of us had marched over to the mayor's house, and were gathered there. We're probably stationed there about 20 minutes or so. There came a point in time where all of a sudden we heard glass breaking, and at that point in time, people started to disperse very quickly to try to get out of the neighborhood and move down Lake. When we were leaving Lake, we quickly found out that we could not leave because the exits to get out of the neighborhood were blocked by multiple, probably at least a dozen Metro buses that were filled with cops in riot gear, to the point where it became very difficult to figure out. People became very confused as to, we can't go this way because there are riot cops to our left, there are riot cops to our right. We're being told to disperse, but there is nowhere for us to go. So people went up onto sidewalks, they went onto people's lawns to try to get out of the neighborhood. And there were a number of people trying to help get folks out of there. And we ended up getting up to Central Reform Congregation. And again, people were still trying to disperse when we were told that if we didn't leave immediately, that they would start tear gassing. At this point in time, there was nothing happening other than people trying to leave the neighborhood. So a group of us ended up going into Central Reform Congregation, and at that point in time, the police came up to the doors and actually wanted in the congregation, wanted us to be able, wanted to know who was inside. And the rabbis did not allow the police inside, and we ended up kind of being in a waiting game to see how do we get out of here. We can't leave the neighborhood. You could look outside the window, you could see the entire synagogue was surrounded by riot cops. There was no way for us to get out of there. A couple hours would pass, and finally a group of us, most of the police presence had left that area, and a number of us decided that it was about time that we see if we could get back to our cars, which were down south of Lindell. And so we walked down Kings Highway. We met a line of riot police. We asked for permission to cross through that line in order to get to our cars. We're granted permission. We're allowed to turn onto Lindell and walked about halfway down Lindell before an MRAP came around the corner without warning and deployed tear gas on us while we were walking on the sidewalk. That was an issue of not having warning before any kind of chemical agent was dispersed, which is in violation of a temporary restraining order that we have had in place in the city stemming back to 2014 when Mokabee's Coffee Shop was, which is in the 15th Ward, was tear gassed. And so I think that it's important that the chief be coming before us to talk about that issue and what is happening that we are not giving that warning that we are supposed to. The second thing I'd like to speak to that I think is concerning is the night of the highway shutdown. And there were a group of us who were trying to record what was happening. What we witnessed was that the people who were arrested first were legal observers and were press. And those of us who did not fit those categories but were trying to record and document what was going on were pushed so far away from the line of police that we could not monitor what was happening. And when we asked to be to be able to move, to be closer to record, we were threatened with arrest. Those are just a couple of examples of some things that I have witnessed that I think are concerning and the chief needs to answer to. There are a couple of other things that just some pictures that I handed out. One is a patch that is being displayed on the uniforms of officers. CDT is Civil Disobedience Team, and this seems to be a patch of pride.
You have copies of those?
Yes,
We sent it.
All we got was this.
there should be two of them there.
Well, I got one.
They're going down.
The log jam.
I keep doing it.
I think we can see from this patch which is a gas mask and some riot clubs, that our civil disobedience response team seems to think that their job is to be tear gassing people, that their job is to be approaching folks with riot sticks. The other is a picture of the civil disobedience team kind of welcoming protesters to Washington Avenue, which I think also speaks to kind of a mockery of protests. And there's one last thing that I want to bring up before I close, and that's the reason that I think a lot of this over-response is happening are some personnel issues that I think that the chief needs to address, particularly with regard to a paramilitary group called 0311 Tactical Solutions that is essentially operating within our police department. This is a for-profit company that is run by Captain Deba and Sergeant Rosamano. And when you look at their website, their goal is basically to train cities in how to have extreme militaristic response towards situations. And these are two officers in particular that have been emboldened to run our protest response, who we have seen at many protests. And we know both through conversations that we've had with this chief and the previous chief. I brought up my concerns about these officers to the previous chief multiple times, that these personnel issues need to be handled, and we need to understand how our officers are being allowed to run a secondary company that essentially is training other police officers in other police departments in mechanisms that are contrary to what we would aspire to in terms of community policing.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Gunther?
Our colleague said he was going to, since we had so many speakers, that he didn't need to speak.
Okay.
And so the second person will be Eliza Coriel, who is a business owner and took the unprecedented opportunity to get together a open letter titled "St. Louis Business Owners Stand in Solidarity with the Shockley Protesters," and she circulated, and she got 334 people to sign it, and many business owners, and she is our next speaker.
Thank you, everybody. I do have some packets. We did have 334 signatures, as you can see from the signature pages that start on page 2. 157 of them were business owners, representing 150 businesses, and then there was an additional 177 people who signed on in support of those businesses. So it is from that perspective that I will speak today. I have repeatedly referred to this letter as a call for perspective. After all, broken windows can be replaced, but lives cannot. As a business owner, I felt that the media's constant attention to the broken windows used people like me to distract from the message of protesters. Stop killing us. I'm going to say that again. Stop killing us. It's a demand that I think the people of good conscience cannot oppose. But as I put my thoughts on paper, I realized that if I was asking other businesses to sign their names to a letter, I had to speak to the risks that entailed. Not the potential loss of patrons, not the bad Yelp reviews or the phone calls that we were sure to receive from the nastier among our opposition. There was a worse and more divisive risk, the risk of backlash from the police. The very people we would call upon if our windows were broken. I wrote in part, due to the police targeting of local businesses who spoke out during the Ferguson uprising, as well as in recent days, it is difficult to put our faith for protection in city officials or police departments. We see police escalating tensions on the streets and then denying responsibility for the results. It is not clear to us that police have our best interests at heart when they are preoccupied with macho attempts to own the streets. Frankly, we have reason to wonder if we have more to fear from the police officers than from a small handful of vandals. Unfortunately, in the days that followed the first media publication of the letter, I watched as my supposition became a reality. On page 10 of the packet I gave you, you will find a photo of the St. Louis Police Officers Association's Facebook page. Their post reads, "For what it's worth, a list of STL businesses that hate cops and sympathize with vandals, brought to you by a tabloid birdcage liner that hates cops and sympathizes with vandals. Hashtag back the blue." The message was clear to me. We must blindly agree with every action of every officer or else, a mentality that officers have used to form their so-called blue line. The comment section was full of people suggesting that police become unresponsive should these businesses need help. This message that officers should choose who they protect and serve was never refuted by the SLPOA. No department spokesperson was deployed to ensure the public that officers would do their job regardless of their personal opinions. Acting Chief O'Toole never came forward to denounce this inference or to give us one of his "I hold my officers to the highest standards" sound bites. I was not alone in my interpretation of the Facebook post. The Post-Dispatch and the Riverfront Times were quick to call out this intimidation. Copies of those articles can be found separately in the back of the packet. Again, there was no statement made on behalf of the SLPOA, the police department, or Acting Chief O'Toole to refute this inference. Clearly, my letter never expressed hatred of the police, nor did it condone vandalism. So the SLPOA changed its post, as you can see on page 11 of the packet. Now it states in part, "For what it's worth, a list of St. Louis business owners who think the men and women of law enforcement are the problem, rather than the drug dealers, murderers, and rioters destroying our city." Was this supposed to be better? It was still a divisive misrepresentation of the actual contents of the letter. Now, I'm not anti-police, and I don't think all police officers are bad. I'm grateful for the hard work and sacrifice and protection afforded to me by certain members of law enforcement. But it is not all or nothing, so to stop the conversation there would be irresponsible. Nobody is denying that positive experiences occur, but the vast majority of those occurrences are afforded to people of my skin color. The Constitution affords us all equal protection under the law. So why is this not reflected in the way St. Louis polices? Why are officers allowed to react out of anger towards protesters? Why are business owners allowed to be intimidated? Why are so many officers deadly afraid of Black people? If you haven't already, watch the videos of the arrests from September 17th and October 3rd and ask yourself, how does this reflect the highest standards that Acting Police Chief O'Toole would have us believe he holds officers to? Thank you.
Thank you.
The next person we have is Keith Rose, who was a protester who was kettled, and then we're going to have Sarah Baker, ACLU.
Good morning. I come today in support Resolution 141.
Thank you.
The board needs to pass this resolution to take seriously the issue of public accountability of the police. The SLMPD is a department where potentially embarrassing sunshine requests go to die. For example, I have personally been waiting to receive some basic records for 18 months now. In order for the public to have any oversight of its police force, you must call on Interim Chief O'Toole to testify. We have seen officers being overcome by their own indiscriminate use of chemical weapons or that of their colleagues, and then misleading the public into believing that protesters were the ones who deployed these weapons. Such fraud is not only disturbing, but is potentially criminal. The board needs to bring the interim chief forward so that he may address the SLMPD's dishonest portrayal of its citizens. In the past month, the SLMPD has twice arrested more than 100 people using the tactic referred to as kettling. I have the dubious honor of being one of only 4 people who were arrested both times. On September 17th, hours after any windows had been broken, SLMPD officers created lines of riot police across 4 blocks, building to building, and swept the streets and sidewalks, corralling every single person in their path. Officers forced more than 100 people into the intersection of Tucker and Washington. Officers began spraying them with powerful OC spray. Officers targeted people who were holding phones and cameras for additional violence. Officers began beating people who were fully compliant. Officers kicked and punched and hit people with batons. Officers used slurs and mocked people that they were arresting. Officers gloated about their ability to act with impunity. And then the interim chief came out and condoned these actions, stating that police owned. The board needs to bring the interim chief in so that he may answer for both the actions of his officers and the culture of the department's anti-protest unit, the civil disobedience team. As the people's representatives, you have a duty to advocate for us. You have a duty to ask the SLMPD why. Why did you decide to arrest all of those people? Why did you decide to beat them? Why did you decide to spray them? Why did you decide to taunt them? Why did you think that was okay? What is wrong with your officers, and how can we make this stop? Thank you.
Do you have copies of that for the committee?
I can email it to you if you'd like, sir.
If you would.
Thank you.
If you would, thank you. And the first, Alderwoman, where? Alderman Tyler? No, your first guest to speak, she looked like she was reading from something. It would be helpful if the committee had a copy of that as well.
Megan spoke first.
Oh, no, pardon me. She's not your guest. Megan is not your guest.
I thought she gave us that. We got this.
Is it in this material that you read from?
Megan gave us it. She gave
Thank you.
Anybody email to me, I'll send it to the whole committee.
Thank you. That would be helpful for the committee. Committee members are asking for those narratives. Okay. Would you identify yourself? We didn't hear that.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Baker. I'm the Legislative and Policy Director for the ACLU of Missouri. I come before you today to testify in strong support of Resolution 144, which asks for Acting Police Chief Lawrence O'Toole to appear before this committee and answer questions. I think the question before you is, why does he need to be here? It's very simple. There are unconstitutional violations that have occurred against protesters on the streets that our police chief must answer for. Together with the National Lawyers Guild, the ACLU trains and works with legal observers throughout the city of St. Louis and throughout the state of Missouri. Here's some of what they've seen. Officers who declare an unlawful assembly without legal justification, violating the First Amendment rights of demonstrators. Officers failing to identify themselves and shouting obscenities when called upon to do so, purposely escalating already tense circumstances. Officers using chemical agents against demonstrators without notification, and even when demonstrators are already in restraints, and other examples of excessive force, violating the 14th Amendment right to due process. Officers engaging in kettling techniques leading to mass arrests and countless violations of civil liberties, in particular, including First, Fourth, Sixth, and 14th Amendment violations. We cannot allow these unconstitutional violations to continue, and it's why my organization is suing the city of St. Louis to address some of these concerns. We filed suit on September 22nd. I urge you to read that motion in its full. It contains the testimony and the declarations of many of the people here today who can testify to what happened to them on the streets and explicitly note where the constitutional violations occurred. Their words must be at the center of this conversation. We have a culture of impunity to uproot. I urge you as a legislative body to move beyond just conversation and just asking those important questions, which I think are vital, into taking actions. Take actions as a legislative body to limit the use of chemical agents against protesters on the streets. Take actions to eliminate kettling, which leads to civil liberties violations. And take actions that tell our police department that though they may be overworked and though that the job is difficult, there is no excuse for violating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. We're relying on you to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And you gave the Alderwoman your written...
Yes, I handed my written testimony to her. I'm happy to email it as well.
Okay, thank you. Your next guest?
The next guest is Representative Bruce Franks, followed by Amir Brantley of Peacekeeper.
Oh, thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Chairman, all members of the board. We have a saying now, as we protest and as we hit the streets, that if you can't rely on the folks that you pay to protect you, then we must protect ourselves. We're in support of this resolution, going back to the board, because we feel that there are some questions that need to be asked of our interim chief. Personally, one particular night, I was upset because I wasn't there when the kettling happened the first time. And I saw videos of protesters being pepper sprayed while complying with handcuffs on. And so when we got out there, when we hit the streets, I decided, and this is me telling y'all, I decided to make Officer Rosamano feel exactly what they felt that night. And because Officer Rosamano was uncomfortable, because he was emotional and upset, he put out a call and called for a warrant for me for assault on a police officer, which never happened. We have all footage, including his own footage. But he allowed himself to get in his emotions and get upset to the point where he made a false accusation. Same way at Busch Stadium, when I went over the barricades to de-escalate while having a ticket to the game in my pocket, because I had a ticket to the game, so it's kind of hard to be trespassing while you got a ticket to the Cardinals game. And I went over to de-escalate because I saw officers agitating the protesters that had come out of the Cardinal game who had been protesting. There has been time after time in these last 16, 17 days where we saw where the police were the aggressors, where the police did the mass arrest, even on the highway action, when you arrest folks who weren't even on the highway because they joined on the sidewalk, and to cut the sidewalk off and to cut all access everywhere and say move, but you have nowhere to move is not okay. We haven't seen Interim Chief O'Toole at any of these actions, but we see him praise what's being done. We see him praise how they're handling the protesters. We've had incident after incident that have gone with no accountability. And if we can't rely on our police department to even protect their black officers, how can we rely on them to protect black folks as well as protesters who are out here protesting this very thing? Last point I want to touch on is to pull an officer back from the protest who's been out there for 3 years, who's built a certain rapport with protesters, with activists. We might not agree all the time. We might yell at each other a few times, but this black officer has built a rapport with a lot of the activists, a lot of the protesters. And because he got too close, because he's working on protest police relationships, he gets pulled back. He didn't need the help of Brian Rosamano. He didn't need the help of a lot of these other CDT unit officers. But to pull him back because you see a black man in charge is an issue. So we support this going back, being voted on, and bringing O'Toole to the Public Safety Committee to ask him these tough questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman, your next guest.
There he is, Mr. Brandy. This is Mayor Brandy, and I have something to pass out about him being pepper sprayed while he was going the other way.
Good morning. My name is Amir Brandy. I'm a activist with the Peacekeeper organization. I'm also a photographer. I've been involved with the activist community since August of 2014. So I've seen what's playing out now play out over and over and over. At some point, you would think that the system would fix itself. Everything that's been spoken of this morning has been identified over and over again. The actions of law enforcement as it pertains to activists are consistent. They've been doing it. It is my belief that they're going to continue to do it if they're not stopped. Leadership is obviously okay with it. I think about the day of the kettle, the last kettle, and I was able to see a route out of that kettling, and they were closing in, and some of the other activists, they left as well. But at some point, right after we took that exit, which was the parking lot of the building that sits on Market and Jefferson, there were people trying to leave. There was a quiet distress message given, and the people were trying to comply. In fact, I was live feeding that night, and you can hear the people saying, "We're trying to comply to your direction and leave, and you're not allowing us." And those people were arrested. No matter whether or not they had to post bond or the inconvenience of being arrested for something that, you shouldn't be arrested for. What if you had a job? What if you had responsibility? What if your kids were displaced because you were arrested, because you were peacefully protesting? These people were on the sidewalk. And I too work for a law office with 7 attorneys, and at the end of the day, when I go back and tell them what happened the night before or the day before, just like the young lady from the ACLU say, they're breaking the law. They're doing what they want to do. On the night that you're looking at, September 29th, we were peacefully protesting after leaving the baseball game. And when we got to Walnut and Broadway, we were stopped by law enforcement. And they asked us if they could allow some of the traffic to proceed. And they split the protest up. And we complied. Some of us were on the other side of the traffic, and there were a few of us still on the back side of the north side of traffic. At some point, everything was calm. Everybody complied. At some point, an officer walked up to Reverend Gray, and he not only pushed Reverend Gray, but he manhandled a lady clergy who was also at the scene. Myself and a few other photographers were on the other side of the traffic, and we observed what was going on. And at some point, we made it to the other side. And I asked the officer, why was he being arrested? I looked and I seen that they were tasing Mr. Kennedy. And I asked, what did he do? This officer sprayed me. He sprayed myself. He sprayed a young lady in the wheelchair. He sprayed Mr. Aldridge, Rasheen Aldridge. He just sprayed, and he was having a ball doing it. If you look at the expression on his face, and there are more pictures, he continued to spray. Even as I was leaving, and his supervisor stood there and allowed that, which said that he was okay with it. I asked him that night, why did you let him do me like that? He said, I wasn't there. This is what the supervisor said. That's in that picture. He said, I wasn't there. I responded. But he's in that picture. And I say, wow, this is what law enforcement has deteriorated to? Or has it deteriorated? That's a question I ask. I'm 52 years old, and I've never seen law enforcement in the manner in which it's described. The good cop, where are they? Why don't they stand up? Why don't they say what's going on? When is somebody going to do something? We're tired of being killed. So we support this resolution in hopes of something changing for the positive. And at the end of the day, we hope that y'all make the right decision today.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Our next guest needs no introduction. Mr. John Chesnack, who we all know has been down here many times to talk to us about police behavior and things we need to do to improve it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Chasnoff with the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression, and I wanted to speak in support of the resolution today from a different point of view. I have some concerns about the landscape of investigations that's developed around the types of stories you're hearing today, and so I think it's most appropriate for you all to call the police chief in to ask questions because of that landscape regarding investigation. So. A few weeks ago, the mayor and the police chief asked the U.S. attorney to do an investigation into the response to protests. And the U.S. attorney has written a letter back. I'm not sure if you all have read that or not, but the U.S. attorney wrote a letter back responding to that request. What she said was that there were really two streams of investigations that the U.S. attorney's office could do. The first stream had to do with pattern and practice of behavior, and so that stream would be forwarded to Washington, D.C. For further investigation from the federal government. But we all know that Jeff Sessions has already come out and said that he doesn't believe in those pattern and practice investigations, and so we have no reason to think that that particular stream will go anywhere. Secondly, the Civilian Oversight Board has the ability to do that type of investigation into policies and practices of the police department, but we haven't heard from them yet that they plan to do that investigation. So there's really hasn't been an outlet for us to see an investigation that has to do with the overall policing response to the protests. That's why I hope you'll invite the chief in. The second stream of investigation that the U.S. attorney talked about was individual violations of civil rights. So the local office of the U.S. attorney has the ability to investigate individual officers, again, who violate people's civil liberties. But we have no information yet coming from the mayor's office or from the chief that they plan to forward evidence to the U.S. attorney regarding individual violations of civil rights. So we don't know if that investigation will go anywhere or not. I hope if you do call the chief in and have that hearing, that you'll ask the chief if he plans to send in evidence to the U.S. attorney's office so that they can complete those types of investigations. Secondly, the Civilian Oversight Board does have the ability also to pursue individual violations of policing policy. But I have some concerns on that front as well, because what the mayor's office put out to the community was if you have a complaint, you can go to internal affairs or to the civilian oversight. And technically that's true. But the police have found a loophole in the civilian oversight ordinance, which allows them to, if you go to internal affairs and don't ask for the joint form, the one that the civilian oversight also uses, if you don't specifically ask for that joint form, your complaint is filed with the police department, but never goes to the Civilian Oversight Board. And so we have been kind of frantically trying to educate the community. Please file with the Civilian Oversight Board. That way your information will go both to the Oversight Board and to the police department. If you go to the police department, it may or may not happen in the other direction. So we have concerns then about individuals filing complaints and those actually being heard and dealt with properly in terms of violations of policy. So for all those reasons, I think it's really important that you all call the chief in here and ask questions about the type of policing that we're seeing, because it may be the only effective outlet we have for that type of investigation. Thanks.
Did you have any others? That completes your list of guests.
Sorry, Mr. President, I hurt my back yesterday. I'm walking slowly. Yes, that, Mr. Chairman, that completes my list of guests. And then two, I told you the two,
Yes.
Reverend Tapman, and then Chris Phillips is going to be the second person because the other person left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now we'll go to the list of individuals who have signed to speak on the resolution. Again, we would need to hear whether or not you support this committee passing this resolution back to the full board, and any reasons that you may have for that. We will keep this portion of it to 2 minutes, and we will time you and try to give you an indication when you're running out of your time. When you first come up, please identify yourself. Now, I'm going to try to call these names as best I can, based upon the writing and my ability to read them right now. So we first have up Chris Phillips. Is that Chris Phillips? That's you, okay.
How's everybody doing? I really meant to really just show some video footage, but I guess you guys don't have the proper format to do it. So I'll really explain really what I had. Pretty much what I had is some clips that I filmed. By the way, I have a film company. It's Maverick Media Group. We do feature narrative and documentary feature work. And so, you know, I kind of maintain an objective stance when I'm out there filming for the most part. But I do, you know, I just watch and I capture a lot of things. And so a few things that were really kind of disturbing to me, which is why I even compiled the DVD clip or whatnot, which I do have, is the night at the baseball stadium. Mr. Brandy, who already testified over there, Mr. Kennedy, Daryl Gray, all of those, I was pretty much the one that captured all that. So I witnessed I filmed his arrest. Right. I filmed Mr. Kennedy getting tased, and I saw Mr. Brandy get pepper sprayed. And the disturbing thing about that is, you know, I guess there's talk about dispersal orders that are supposed to be given before they're using chemical munitions, and you know, none of that was called. It was really just agitated officers really spraying the canister. Right. And I could really see it, which is why I captured it, because I saw the officer and his facial expressions and the taunting and things like that. So I kept eyes on him when that was occurring. The other thing that I'll address briefly is the night of the kettling. Prior to that happening is a moment where the officers were just chasing random people that were, you know, without any dispersal orders given. And this is prior to the kettling. And the problem that I have with that is that I saw Dirk Brown, who a lot of people know he's a live streamer. He got caught in that arrest. And so, yes, there were people there was a minute amount of people that were destroying buildings and property. But amongst that, you had filmmakers, photographers, bystanders, and some people that were peacefully marching. And the fact that there was no dispersal order given, that people got swept up in this, arrested, that's a problem, you know, and the fact that escalated later on.
Your time is, that's your 2 minutes.
That's my 2 minutes, okay. Well, yeah, so I just wanted to address that, but I will say that if anybody needs to see any of those clips or any of that, you know, I do have that upon request.
There's one quick,
Yes, can you load it up on YouTube and email the chairperson or share it with the committee members?
Yeah, whatever, I forget that.
And I take it you do support us passing this out to go back?
Oh, absolutely, okay. Absolutely.
You're in support of the resolution?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We'll now call up Calvin Kennedy, Senior.
How you all doing?
All right.
I'm Calvin Kennedy. So I'm a bandwagon off Amir Brandy. The night we was at Busch Stadium, September the 29th, when I saw when the cops threw Daryl Gray down on the ground, first thing he screamed out was my glasses. When his glasses fell, cop stepped on him. When he stepped on him, then I said something, like, why would you do that? Before you know it, one cop screamed to another cop, told him, come arrest me. So he come over, grabbed my shirt, and sprayed me with the pepper spray. Just because I'm not going down with this pepper spray, the other cops come over and tase me. All this was just because of the reaction of us wondering why you just pushed 2 clergy women. When they arrested me, from that night till the morning, when they shoot you with a taser, 2 pieces that come out called a prong. One of them was left in my arm for 16 hours. The whole night I was in the Justice Center, which means I couldn't sleep. But in order for me to sleep, I had to lay up on the wall. But that was difficult because inside the majority of the rooms, 35% of the walls have blood on them from like riots, fights, or whatever. When I got out that morning, well, inside, there's not so much she can do. She asked me what was wrong with my arm. I told her, well, it's hurt because of a metal piece. There's nothing she really can do to get it out. So when I got out, I went to Barnes Hospital. 2 choices. Either they was gonna have to go through a little small surgical process, or they're gonna have to numb me.
You have about 30 more seconds.
You numb my arm and had to turn it almost 40 to 50 times just to pull it out. When I read last night that St. Louis, Missouri has 70% of unsolved murders, you would think you would see riot cops all over the city, but instead they show up to peaceful protests. To me, that's inappropriate, very disrespectful, and what you think we supposed to do. It's like now we gotta police ourselves, and something really need to be done. Thank you.
So you're in support of us passing this resolution today?
Sir.
All right, thank you. I will remind those who are testifying that the discussion of the committee here today is whether or not it should pass this resolution to go back to the full board. If that passes, we will be back here again to take testimony, and you'll have an opportunity then to have a little bit more time to give your full story, okay? Or more full story. Mackenzie Marks is next.
Hi, Mackenzie Marks, and I am for the passing of 141. I'm really short, sorry. On the first day of the no verdict on Friday, September 15th, I was instantly rammed into a bus by a bike cop while also simultaneously telling me to move, which was impossible because I was being pushed forcefully with the bike. Immediately, I looked to my right as I'm trying to push off the bike cop to be able to follow his order of moving, and I was pepper sprayed 3 times directly point blank to the face. And then the night of the non-kettling, or the kettling, I was moved and was told to disperse, which was about actually an hour before the kettling took place. I moved and was instantly again met with pepper spray while following the police officer's orders to disperse. He did not arrest me, he didn't do anything, he simply pepper sprayed me for the sake of pepper spraying me and got great joy out of doing so. On the night on this past Tuesday, a week ago today, I was also arrested for peacefully protesting while standing on a sidewalk. Upon my arrest, I was misgendered and then mocked after correcting the officer. The police force has been nothing but brutal to the protesters when we are being nothing but peaceful, and that is why I'm in support of passing 141.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brian McKellen? Brian McKellen?
Good morning. My name is Brian McClellan. I'm a Dutchtown resident. Have been for 8 years, and lifelong St. Louisan. My grandfather was a municipal lawyer in the city, and my other grandfather was a police officer. My uncle was a police officer. I support the institution of the police, and even after being maced in 2003 at a Iraq war protest, I stood up for them and I said that that's what they had to do. But since 2014, I've heard too many stories, and I've seen with my own eyes now in the streets and in the Justice Center the ways that the rules are bent and the abuses that occur, just blatant violence that comes down. I brought my son to a protest at the Bush Stadium the night that Mr. Kennedy was tased and Mr. Aldridge was maced. And I'll tell you, I wanted to leave a little earlier, but I didn't feel safe leaving the protesters. I felt safer with my son on my shoulders within the confines of the people than passing by a line of police officers. And that is why I support hearing the testimony of Chief O'Toole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe it's John Ziegler.
Hello, my name is John Ziegler, also known as Revolutionary Z, founder of RevZ TV. I live stream. You guys have probably all seen my video from the first kettling, which I hope you have if you are responsible members of this council, because that's a story that you're hearing everyone tell tonight. I was involved, like Keith Rose, in both kettlings, and you're probably asking, well, how did you end up there? Because I live stream these people. I try to get the truth out there, and people say, well, you had plenty of opportunities to leave. I can't leave until I feel people are safe from the police because of everything I've witnessed from 2014 Ferguson to this point on. I support the resolution. I think the chief needs to come before the board and hear these stories. I think he needs to answer some questions from that night and all these other nights you're hearing testimony from. He said he owned that night, and then he backtracked the next couple days later, said they're going to do an investigation. So he clearly saw the videos from that night, and I think you guys should play him these videos while he's in the board meeting and get his live responses to what he's seeing his police officers doing. And it goes beyond just the chief. Since I told you I've been covering this since Ferguson 2014, there's a culture within the police department, and not just St. Louis, but specifically here in St. Louis. You've heard Brian Rossimano's name come up. What we haven't heard is Captain Mike Deba's name come up. Co-owners of 0311 Tactical Solutions, who train St. Louis to do the tactics that you've seen and you've heard about, talked about in this committee hearing today. 0311 Tactical has been using, in my opinion, these protests as kind of a PR stunt to show other police departments how they can handle protests, because they are hired by other police departments to train in counter protest techniques that you've seen take place in St. Louis.
You have about 30.
Okay, 30 seconds. So I think it's the culture of the police department that needs to be brought to light with this interim chief. If he really cares about being the chief for long and changing what needs to be changed in St. Louis, he needs to take a look at the culture that's being trained, and also the Fraternal Order of Police. The power that they have is way too much, and everybody knows it. And speaking of power, back to Sergeant Brian Rossimano, people are like, well, he's just a sergeant. I hear that all the time. The culture from 0311, him and Deba, has a large amount of power within the police force. That goes, what I believe, above Chief O'Toole.
Your time is.
Okay, thank you for hearing.
So you are in support of it?
I am in support of the resolution, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Emily, is it Davis? Pardon me, it's Julia Davis. I'm combining names here. Julia Davis, pardon me. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm Julia Davis, and I'm an activist. I'm a protester, and funny that Rev Z spoke before me, because I saw you being arrested. I was watching the live stream, and I saw him being arrested for live streaming. And I saw Keith Rose being arrested at the same time, because the officer Keith asked why was Rev being arrested. And the officer was angry and told him that he was going to be arrested too. So that what they do to us is unnecessary. And 0311 Tactical, I just want to know, is there a conflict of interest with Rossimano and 0311 Tactical working with the police department? Because he's the police, right? And then he manages 0311 Tactical, and he trains them how to brutalize us. this we need to know and understand, because they gonna stop killing us. And they gonna stop spraying us. They gonna stop doing the things that they doing to us. They've termed us black identity extremists now. It's the new term for black people who fight back. We're not extreme yet. I support this resolution.
Thank you.
Get him here before we get extreme.
Our next speaker is, I believe it's Emily Dans. Did I say that one wrong?
Hi, I'm Emily Davis, and I am here to speak in favor of sending the Resolution 141 to the full board for passage. Over the last 3 weeks, I've watched egregious abuses and escalation of violence perpetrated by the police on civilians. Chief O'Toole needs to answer for his decisions and the actions of his officers. I've watched many abuses occur directly by or under the direction of Sergeant Rossamano, whom Alderwoman Green and many others have spoken about today. He escalates protests, violating the ordinances of the city and the laws of the state to quash constitutionally protected rights to protest by repeatedly calling unlawful assemblies despite the situation not meeting the legal definition of such. I've watched men under his command assault people. I have watched them throw tear gas canisters directly into the middle of crowds to confuse people and to punish people, clearly not for dispersal. People were not given egress, they were thrown directly in. And the kettling, which so many people have spoken about today, and that the police denied, despite the fact that there's plenty of eyewitness testimony, despite the fact that there is video from both victims and I'm sure the city's own cameras. When the police kettled that crowd, they weren't there to arrest people who had torn anything up. As others have testified, those people had left hours earlier. They were there to exact revenge on anyone in their path, anyone who dared to stand on their streets. They were vicious, they were vengeful, and they were gleeful in their brutality, and they were out of control. Rossamano was there, other officers were in charge, they were all there, and they were out of control. The things that they said and the things that they did, I looked up from my spot, face down on the pavement, to see them have a man sitting next to me, sitting there compliant and quiet, while they pepper sprayed him from 6 inches away in his face over and over and over again. And the things that they said that night and the things that they did that night, it was vicious and it was out of control, and they had a really good time doing it. After the kettling in the Justice Center, when I was being escorted downstairs by the prisoner processing supervisor,
About 30 seconds left.
Okay, who's of course in charge of releasing people, he said in the elevator, he said, I don't know why we're letting those people go so they can just tear up some more shit. It's my goal to make sure they rot in hell. The police chief needs to answer for the brutality of his officers, but honestly, good luck, because clearly he and the SLMPD have a serious problem with the truth. But this is all about protesters, and the last thing I just want to say is that the SLMPD has murdered 10 people this year, more than the last 2 years combined. And if you can just stop letting them kill people, he'll stop having to figure out how to deal with protesters.
Thank you. Was it Philip Weeds or Weds? Philip?
Thank you very much. My name is Philip Weeks. I live in the city of St. Louis, Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association to be specific. I support you passing Resolution 141 and recommending to the Board of Aldermen that they pass it. I could testify to the actions of the police department, but what I'd like to do instead is to testify to you as a community member, as and your obligations as representatives of your communities. Okay, as representatives of your wards, you represent communities in the city. Your neighbors are part of the community that you represent, your neighborhood associations and your ward committees. Residents in your ward are diverse. Some of them are undoubtedly in the streets. Okay, and so there are more protesters probably than any time in recent history in the city of St. Louis demonstrating. They were out numerous nights, and they're still coming out. So I've been a member of many of the organizations in my ward. The 15th Ward Dems, Tower Grove South Neighborhood Association, And there are other organizations I belong as well that are active in the city and active in the state. I'm co-chair of the Human Rights Task Force of Empower Missouri and a member of OBS. I'm speaking to you because you must have Officer O'Toole in front of you, because if you believe in community policing whatsoever, it's necessary that you hold him responsible. We tried to do that with Captain Deba and the Tiger Grove South Neighborhood Association. He did not meet with us, okay? So your officers have, and the people you employ, do not have a very good record of meeting with the community. And so that was with the president of the Tiger Grove South Neighborhood Association. And so you, as representatives of your wards and the Board of Aldermen, need to hold the police accountable. You need to operate as a community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe is it Breen? Breen? Okay.
Okay, my name is Bryn Holmes. I am in support of passing Resolution 141. As I sat here, and I'm the last person on the list, as I sat here, I listened to countless people talk about the tactics of the police and the way that they handle the public. They talked, different speakers spoke about the culture, the police culture, and we have witnessed police lie, we have witnessed police assault people, we have witnessed intimidation, and many people have spoken about the incident at Busch Stadium and the Highway 40 shutdown. We had a protest at the police department on Olive Street, and it was in the daytime, it was kind of light, but the mood with the police was very antagonistic. So we were about to wind down because it was Sunday night, and people was like, okay, it's Monday, we got to go to school, we got to go to work, because people say the protesters don't have jobs. But all the protesters that I met, they have jobs, they own businesses, they're active in the community. So anyway, we were out there, and I think it was winding down. I think we was about to go in, and all of a sudden, a police officer in a car backed up towards the protest. First, they jumped down on somebody, arrested somebody. So when people went to see what was going on, the police car, it was an unmarked vehicle, it went very fast in reverse, like in an attempt to mow down the people that were out there. And so after that, that brought the atmosphere all the way up to fever pitch. And I remember we were out there, it was snipers on the roof, and I was looking like, okay, this is crazy. We got snipers on the roof. Like, is this Baghdad? Is this? And the protesters are not bringing weapons. They're not attacking police.
You have about 30 more seconds.
Okay. They're not attacking police, but we don't want to be attacked by police. So when you speak to the culture, you have to understand there is a long history of police being able to act with impunity. That's the reason that they brag, and they're braggadocious about the things that they do, about the crimes that they commit and that they get away with. So that's why I'm in support of this resolution. But I wanted to highlight that because I don't know if anything was ever done about the attempt on the lives of protesters that day. And that's something that I heard that day highlighted, but not since. So I wanted to bring that.
Thank you. Thank you. We have Reverend Dana Tapman, who's the last one. That's our last speaker.
Yes, good morning, Brother Chairman, and to this board, and to all of you that are in the audience. I won't be for you long. I am in support of the passage of Resolution 141 by this board and the full board. And just to share with you 3 things I want you to think about, the words that have been used constantly, kettling. Take a moment and think about that. That's what you do with animals. And that's what they've been doing with those on the street, kettling them, and then punishing them for reacting to being kettled. There's one thing I want to say as well. There was a case, March 6, 1857, Dred Scott, which stated, is there any rights that a black man has that a white man has to adhere to? And I want to take those very words and paraphrase them. Is there any rights that a black man has and those who are allies to him that the police have to adhere to? So I would like to say to this board that you have the power, the moral responsibility to pass this resolution, as well as the full board of aldermen.
Thank you. That completes our list. We appreciate everyone's cooperation. We'll bring the sponsor back up for any final words. I'm not recognizing you to close, but if you have any other statements before we start a discussion.
No, I thought you were telling me to close.
I was, but I didn't realize some committee members wanted to speak. I was trying to move us along.
Okay.
Where is the list? I missed it. Questions from members of the committee to the sponsor? You can still come up. Alderman Boyd?
No questions.
Alderman Vaccaro, any questions?
I do.
Or statements?
Both. Actually, it seems to me we're being asked to pass something out without hearing both sides. I did text the chief during the meeting. He was not asked to come. And at any point, we've asked the chief to come to these meetings here, and he comes. We've never had to do a resolution to ask the chief to come. I just think that there should have been two sides to a hearing. We only heard one side of the story. I would like to obviously hear another side. I can't in good conscience pass this out. I understand what everyone's saying, but I will say that this meeting was set up to only bring in one side of a story, and it's not the way we should do things here. We should be open-minded, and we should have two sides of a story. And again, I texted the chief during this, and he was asked not to come. So, I mean,
he was not asked not to come.
He was asked not. Well, he was not asked to come.
He may not have got an invitation, but he was not asked not to come.
No, I'm sorry. He was not asked to come.
Yeah.
I can answer.
Pardon us, everybody.
I guess the sponsor.
This is just a committee discussion right now.
I got this, okay?
So
I just don't want us to have confusion.
Well,
We had some confusion here today in that we were not scheduled for this testimony today. What we were scheduled for today was a committee discussion with the sponsor of the resolution, who had some specific individuals that she had to speak. We had a confusion, and that confusion, the word got out that we were going to have a public testimony. So I was not going to send people home who had taken time out of their schedules to come here and speak without giving them the opportunity to speak, which I could have done as the chair. But I decided not to do that when people take the time out. So that's what happened. I tried to explain that at the beginning, that we had a confusion, and that this portion of the testimonies would really take place after we passed the resolution. I tried to discuss that at the very beginning so we had clarity. So that's why the chief was not invited here today. The thought would be that if it passes this committee and then passes the full Board of Aldermen, everybody will have an opportunity to speak, including the chief and anyone else on the other side. So pardon again for the confusion. The sponsor of the resolution also apologized for it, but that's how we got here today and why I went ahead and took testimony today. Okay?
And I want to say the confusion was on my part. It was not on the chair's part, and I'm readily saying that, so I misunderstood. But it was never.
I would ask that this be held over to next week.
Can you let me finish, please? Yeah. So I let you ask a question, so please let me respond. It was never intended for the chief to come before we passed the resolution. The whole resolution, which, by the way, doesn't have to be a resolution, okay, was so that everyone could come here and we could talk about it. Then I had a few people who I wanted to bring as the reason why I thought we should bring the chief. But it was not to just have one-sided. So most certainly, if we pass this resolution, then the chief will be able to come over, and then he will be able to say his side. It was never intended for the chief to be at this particular meeting. So he was not invited. I did not want him here for this because the whole point of the resolution is, should we bring the chief over to answer questions? But again, I will say, it is the chair's prerogative to do this anyway.
Right.
And when I was the chair, we did it.
They don't need we've had the chief in a lot. We
Okay.
don't need a resolution to do it, but I would say this should be held over so we can hear both sides. I understand the one side. I've gotten a very clear view of it today, but I would never have a hearing that only brought in one side of an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Arnowitz, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Alderwoman, I remember when you stuck up for me at one of my committee hearings because I didn't get a chance to speak and you said it was wrong, and I thank you. And, you know, you and I agree to disagree on some things, but I think we agree on a lot more things than people think. I actually enjoyed hearing the testimony today. It just goes back to me, St. Louis is, you know, we have a big gap with failure to communicate. And I think it is important that everybody sits down and talks. And I'm not defending anybody one way or the other. I'm not out there. I see what I see on TV, some live streaming and everything else. What causes a lot of things, I don't know. I'm all in favor of having everybody sitting down and talk. I think that's where we lack a lot of things. You know, and I mean, I support police. I mean, it's a known fact. But, you know, when you have police that's bad, you have to get rid of them. A lot of people take that job. It's not because of the pay, and they want to make a difference. And again, we've had bad police for years, and you're just hoping that the good police step it up so we weed them out. I don't have a problem at all supporting this resolution because I think the main thing is sit down and talking and having good conversation without yelling and screaming. And I think you get a lot more things done that way. You know, you and I both know some of the hardest things to do is sit down, talk about racism, black and white, but until you sit down and air what you think and hear other sides, you know, you're taking the first step of a learning curve. So, you know, there's always two sides to every story, and I believe that. And I want to thank you and let you know I'm in favor of supporting this.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. First of all, I definitely support the resolution. I think we have some grave concerns in our community, and we definitely need to address them. But I'm also glad that, Mr. Chairman, and also the sponsor, that you offer clarification regarding the resolution, because when I read it, and I know many people in the public, when they read it, it was perceived that the only way we can get the chief to come is if we pass a resolution. And so when Alderman Vaquero brought it up that, okay, he hasn't been asked to come before us as of yet, is that the case?
He has not. Yes.
Okay, and so I think that's important for us to put that out there. It hasn't been a situation where, oh, well, it's so bad off that, you know, he won't even talk to him unless they make him come. So I'm just glad that, you know, we all are talking and we can move forward, because that's my greatest concern. Since some of this stuff has happened, I've seen, you know, it's been a lot of political folly back and forth with it, and, you know, we were elected to lead, and our constituents are dependent on us to make the right decision and not tee stuff up because it's an election year, and not play with this because people's lives are in danger, you know, and it's incumbent upon us to do what they elected us to do. So I'm just glad that we clarified the chief hasn't been asked.
No.
Okay, and this needs to be done to make him come. Okay, so basically this is just for information sharing, and we definitely want him before us so he can address some of these concerns.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I just want to say, so you talk about, I've made a statement many, many times. I grew up with the police, down the street from the police. I've been friends with the police. I will call the police on you. I am pro-police. I am not pro-bad police. The police all know that. I've dealt with the police since I was a young public defender in the 80s. So I've subpoenaed them, and I've proved they weren't telling the truth on things, and sometimes they've been my witness, and they helped me with a case. I don't come in here with an agenda except for I do not want bad policing. I want good policing. If I didn't have to do this resolution, I wouldn't have. I've done it because I guess it's from the lawyer in me to present testimony of why we should have this and to convince you. I didn't try to pass it on the floor. I probably could have passed it on the floor. I didn't try to do that because I wanted to come here because I think that's the proper way to do resolutions, which is why I asked that Alderman Vaccaro's resolution also be here. When you have a resolution that already comes to a conclusion, then that's kind of hard. I'm here to answer any questions you have about my motive or whatever, but I just, like I said, originally it was just going to be a few people to say, this is why, as I watched what was going on, I thought we should bring the police chief in. It doesn't have to be a resolution, but it doesn't not have to be one also. It's both ways. I never said that the chief wouldn't come. I didn't even put any press out. I don't normally go to the press. I talk to the press a lot, but it's not because I call them up and say, hey, come and see what I'm doing. They've known me over the years, and they know me to be a pretty hard researcher, okay? But it was never to attack the chief. It was to bring the chief in. And the chief also has any right to call the chair, if we're going to say that, and say, hey, I want to come and talk to the members, which when I was the chair of public safety, I was the chair when Mokwa, and he would often call me and say, if he would hear me on the radio saying something, he'd call me and say, hey, I'd like to come and talk to your committee about what was going on. So that runs both ways.
If I may just a little, excuse me. Every committee has the authority and the power to call in whatever department that particular committee of the board has purview over.
Correct.
So streets has the ability to call in the streets director, public safety can call in the fire director, all the different departments. Typically, you will do a resolution. Well, let me go back. So if a committee chair and a committee decides to do some dialogue with one of those department heads under their purview, it is a little bit harder to report that information back. You may come up with some conclusions and some ideas.
Right.
But a resolution gives you a formal way to do that discussion and report it back.
Right.
Because you've also gotten the endorsement of the full board to be able to do it. So a resolution carries a little bit more weight.
Correct.
Particularly as it reports back to the full body. So it provides you a vehicle by which to do that in. But it doesn't mean in this case that the chief has refused to come. He has not. He was not invited to come to this meeting because of how you explained it. This was really just for us as the board to determine whether or not we want to bring him in and ask these questions. So you don't ask that person if you want, I'm going to ask you, I want to bring you in. Do you want me to bring you in? Right, and I'm trying to clarify it even further for others to understand how this committee could have just called him in on its own, but what a resolution does.
Exactly.
The resolution provides a vehicle by which to be able to formally report it back to the entire body. Okay? So that takes us into, did that complete your Alderwoman?
Yeah.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Public Safety Committee, and thank you to the members of the general public that have come here today. While this resolution has the end result of asking our interim chief to come before us, I'd like to take a moment to read a passage from within it because I think that the larger context here is important. Whereas it is in the best interest of the police and the general public at large to ensure the full faith and trust of policing in the city of St. Louis, and that it is not accomplished to the citizens of our city, state, and country, constitutional rights are being violated, or if said citizens have reason to believe through credible evidence or actions by the police that the police are marginalizing, disenfranchising, and targeting the majority community in which the city of St. Louis. So I want to point that out because I think what we have before us is a large body of credible evidence that we have some questionable actions on the part of not our entire police department, but on the part of some and many, and it's considerable. One thing that hasn't been mentioned here today is that The leadership within the protest movement has been calling for peaceful action on a very regular basis, has been leading the charge in non-destructive actions, and the vast majority of participants have been peaceful, non-destructive, and nonviolent. And while there have been a few bad apples and a few bad actions, the leadership within the protest movement has been very quick to condemn all acts of destruction, all acts of violence, and has even been out helping to fix broken windows and other things when they have occurred. I think that those actions are notable, and what I find missing in this conversation is the leadership of our police department failing to condemn acts within the police department that are not becoming of our police department. And I think, therefore, it is very right of our committee to ask the chief to come and discuss actions that are not becoming of the public safety department that protects the citizens of St. Louis. I do agree with Alderman Vaquero that there should be two sides to this conversation, which is precisely why I think we should have the chief here before us with us to discuss. While the citizens are bringing before us concerns, we should have the chief here with us. And I'd like to echo a suggestion by the sponsor of this resolution from the very beginning that we do have the chief here on a very regular basis to discuss and to be with us as the Public Safety Committee has the charge and the responsibility to discuss policy as it relates to public safety within the city of St. Louis. And I hope that the chief is compelled to participate regardless of being invited as the elected body discusses policy related to public safety. And so with that, I offer my support of the resolution, and I'm grateful that we can move forward with it.
Alderman Muhammad.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. We must love and support each other. We must love and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our change. We have nothing to lose but our change.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I support Resolution 141, and I thank you, Alderwoman, for your leadership in it.
Alderwoman Boyd?
No question.
No questions? Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Not, I will recognize the sponsor to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First of all, it's kind of tears in my eyes because when I look out at the people who are here, it's a multicultural group of people from all segments of the city. We were so angry a few weeks ago about the verdict that came out. And to see all of you all come out and show your support, not black, not white, but all over different parts of the city, is so important to me. We are often told we hear about the Second Amendment rights all the time, the right to bear arms. But people forget about the First Amendment, which says, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or bridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. We forget that. The reason I am back down here is because I believe in that. And so oftentimes people are on the outside protesting that when some of the protesters come inside, Alderman Kennedy knows this because he's been a protester, one of the first lessons I had to learn from Congressman Bill Clay was, Sharon, you're inside now. So you don't always have to be outside with the protesters. Just come inside and start writing legislation and doing things that can aid and help the people. This is not anti-police. This is pro-people. I gave you something I hope you will read. It's called Faith Perspective Our police are out of control. It is by James Croft, who is a special to the Post-Dispatch, and he wrote this, and I just saw it. He wrote this in September. I just saw it this morning when I was pulling some things to pass out to you. And one of the things he talks about, and I agree, he says, policing is extremely stressful profession with an unusual danger. People who choose to become police officers should be praised for their willingness to put themselves at personal risk in the name of public safety. But it is exactly those officers, police officers with an appropriate understanding of the profound civic duty their profession represents, who are harmed most when police act against the public good. Abuse of power like those seen over the past few weeks, and he's talking about the St. Louis City Police, destroy the trust between the public and the police and make the good work of policing impossible. It is not pro-police to support the police when they abuse the public. That is pro-tyranny. The fact that policing is hard and dangerous does not mean we should lower our standards for police officers. It means we should keep them high. And that is what I'm attempting to do here, is for the police to answer questions. When we took the police under our control and we voted to put them under our control, we told the citizens that we would be responsible for the police, not just monetarily. We're the legislators here. So if we don't take our own control and do what we're supposed to do and ask the hard questions, then shame on us, and I don't want to be here. Ask the hard questions, and that doesn't mean beating up on the police. That means, as I said before, I've been on both sides. I've had the police as my witnesses, and I've had the police when they didn't tell the truth. And that's about knowing policing, when you know that they're just like people, good and bad. This is not an anti-police anything. This is not an anti-police chief anything or acting police chief. This is a resolution asking for us to bring the police chief in to answer questions about how they are policing our citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd ask for your support. I'm sorry.
I ask you. You want our support, right?
I do.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we pass Resolution 141 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we pass. It's been moved and seconded that we pass our Resolution 141 with a due pass recommendation. Is there any discussion on the motion? Not, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Alderman Boyd?
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro?
No.
Alderman Cone? Alderman Arnowitz?
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard?
Aye.
Alderman Kotar? Alderwoman Spencer?
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad?
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd?
Aye.
Chairman Kennedy?
Aye.
7 aye votes do pass.
By your vote, we sustain the motion of the Alderman from the 22nd.
One no vote.
By your vote, you sustain the motion of the Alderman from the 22nd.
Alderwoman
Resolution.
from the first. Oh, the motion. Okay. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you. I know this was much longer than what we originally anticipated. And again, I want to apologize and thank the members, because this is most important to me, and this is not politics. This is about lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, then. That completes our action related to Resolution 141. We do have other board bills before us. Since we have some guests here for Board Bill 87, we will take that up next. Would you take the, I'm sponsoring.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we still have a hearing that's active and in progress, so if you can keep the noise down, we'd appreciate it.
They need to go out.
So, yeah, just let me know whenever.
Stragging?
Yeah, stragging. Yeah.
Give people opportunity. Alderman Vaccaro.
Alderman Vaccaro. Excuse me, Alderman Vaccaro.
We still have other board bills.
Okay, they want to talk.
You can go out.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
The meeting is still going on.
Right, realize that. She was busy telling
Okay,
me she's
then.
coming after my Steve.
Okay, what's before us now is Board Bill 87, sponsored by Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Board Bill 87 deals with illegal lockouts of residents in rental units. What it is that, you can't hear me. What is that, it is, the state has it as a civil offense to illegally lock someone out. That means then, though, if that happens, that someone has to have their own attorney file a lawsuit and go through that process. Oftentimes, though, that the people who are suffering from that don't have the resources by which to get an attorney, file a suit, and follow that entire process. What this does is to make it a criminal offense here in the city of St. Louis. It's already a civil offense from the state, but it does provide some penalties and makes it a criminal offense in the city of St. Louis. That way, a person will have some other remedies as opposed to just having to get their own attorney and file a suit. We do have some individuals who can speak a little bit further about the bill. If you'd like to, I'll hold for a moment.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Out of respect to the committee, we can barely hear. So if you'd like to have conversation or interview anybody, if you would please take it outside, we'd greatly appreciate it so that we can hear what's going on with the board bills being presented. We greatly appreciate that.
I would like to bring up Mr. Sam Stranger to talk a little bit about the bill.
Okay.
He was standing there. Would you identify yourself?
Sure, yeah. Hi, members of the Board of Aldermen. My name's Sam Stragan. I'm a lifelong city resident, and I'm also staff attorney at Metropolitan St. Louis Equal Housing Opportunity Council. We are the Missouri's only fair housing nonprofit. I speak to you today in favor of Bill 87. As Alderman Kennedy was speaking to, it is a bill to make illegal lockouts, create criminal penalties for illegal lockouts in the city of St. Louis. To kind of define what illegal lockout means to start with, what we probably usually think of is literally a lockout, meaning a changing of the locks or some kind of messing with the ability to actually enter your apartment or place of residency. In fact, it's more broadly defined than that in state law, and it also includes the removing or boarding up of doors or any other kind of entrance or exit way, removing any kind of personal property from the property, right, and that'd be like setting stuff in the street or setting stuff in the dumpster. Or also turning off any utilities, especially electricity or water. Any of those constitutes an illegal lockout. And so what that is also called a self-help eviction. Traditionally, that's when landlords decide, instead of using any kind of dispute resolution process, going through the court system as they should, instead they attempt to remove a tenant illegally by doing one of those actions. As a staff attorney at EHOC, we work towards the elimination of housing discrimination in the St. Louis region and actually in Missouri and Illinois generally. One of the things we work on as part of our work there is things that disproportionately impact people in classes of people who have been previously or are still disadvantaged in society. And it's my testimony here today that illegal lockouts specifically disproportionately impact women of color and families with children, because especially in the city of St. Louis, they are by and large the largest part of the renting market, especially at the lower end of the renting market. I looked at the statistics that we keep in our interactions with tenants. We keep an intake line for general information as well as kind of to recruit clients for our discrimination cases. And in the last year, we had 33 tenants who were at least 33 tenants who were involved in illegal lockouts of some sort, which constitutes about 5% of our entire intake. And that actually covers the larger region as well as St. Louis. So 1 in 20 of the people we talked to had some issue of being illegally locked out within the last year. You're going to hear a little bit more of that from Rob Swearingen and one of his clients who's going to testify after me. But I will say that one of the stories that my colleague Clelia Jackson and I were involved in is a client that we had who was illegally locked out and ended up actually being threatened with the use of a weapon, and actually a weapon was discharged towards her apartment after a landlord was not willing to wait for the court process to go through properly. So I think I heard some discussion before about the issue that there is currently a civil penalty for illegal lockouts at the state level, which is true. The issue that we find with that is that what it requires is a drawn-out court process to work through your ability to, receive some remedy for the wrong that's been done to you as a tenant. And as Alderman Kennedy was mentioning, it probably requires a lawyer who probably is going to cost money unless, you're able to find legal services or our services. So because it's ultimately an emergency situation that can result in immediate homelessness, it is a situation that requires an immediate solution. And unfortunately, police officers are inconsistent about what they feel their role is in an illegal lockout as it's happening. And this would help to clarify that. And the other thing I'd point out is that this immediate homelessness, in fact, adds to our city's issues around homelessness that I know that you all spend lots of time discussing and working through, right? We're talking about a certain percentage of these tenants and families who are forced into shelters, whose education is disrupted, and social services are further strained because of this issue. I'd mentioned that this type of bill has been passed in some of our sister cities, especially Chicago recently has moved towards the criminal statute on this. And so what this bill would do would bring the city in to assist in the enforcement of a law that already exists, right? That illegal lockouts are in fact illegal, that self-help evictions are illegal, and specifically would clarify and empower, hopefully, the police to know their role in assisting tenants who face this illegal activity. And so I'm obviously willing to take questions. Again, my name's Sam Stragan, and I'm an attorney at EHOC, and always happy to answer any questions. I know there's other people testifying after me, so thank you.
Yeah, let me just see if any members of the committee have any questions so far. Alderman Vaccaro, Alderman Arnowitz.
Just a couple quick questions here. On the bill, it says that any tenant cannot be fined while they're being illegally evicted. And what you mean is if the owner of the property comes in, if they leave and decide to change the locks?
Yes, well, I think, are you referencing not charging them rent for the time?
Yes,
Exactly,
yes.
right. So that if an illegal lockout of one of those sorts occurs, that it would be illegal for a landlord to attempt to collect rent for any of that period of time in which the person's been locked out or had, substantial possessions removed from the property or had some substantial way had their ability to be in the property stopped from happening. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do know of a case a few years back where a gentleman wasn't getting his rent, and I think he waited till he left and went and changed his locks. But the actual owner ended up getting a pretty big fine out of it for doing it. So.
Sure, yes, definitely, and that would have been covered under the civil penalty of it, right?
Yes.
And it's, for our purposes, of course, we appreciate and use the civil penalty when need be, but because it's a drawn-out process, it doesn't assist in that emergency situation as is.
Right. Just one more question. So what if there's a situation where person who owes the rent, back rent and everything, and is employed and works, so does he fall under the same case scenario because he's fully employed?
So this is
and
a
can
tenant.
Pay the rent is what I'm saying.
In the state of Missouri, there are two types of evictions. There's the unlawful detainer, which is kind of the holdover, right? That tenancy's ended is still there. There's also the rent and possession. Rent and possession actions are kind of what I think would fall under that category, which is, if a tenant owes rent, they can be brought to court to answer for the fact, right? To answer for the fact that there is rent due, and if they do not pay rent at that time, they can be removed. The court process at this time takes, I'm there pretty much every week, about 2 to 3 weeks to first show up and maybe another couple of weeks. So that's kind of the normal timeline for bringing a tenant to court and removing them from the property.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, Alderwoman Hubbard.
No question.
Okay, Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Members of the, okay, can you walk us through how, and this bill seems is So if a person, what this does is create a vehicle of civil action? No.
So what this creates is the ability of the city to bring a criminal complaint against a landlord owner who has illegally locked out a tenant.
Right, so that would, okay, so that presents a civil action as opposed to municipal.
It technically would be, I think, a municipal fine.
Okay.
As far as it being an ordinance goes.
I got you. So if a landlord then participates in an illegal eviction, then the city will have authority to take them to municipal court and institute a municipal fine of 100. Is that the way I'm reading this?
Yes, they would be able to recover, I think it's 100 to 500 for each offense.
Of illegal eviction?
Yes, and that would in no way, of course, displace the civil penalty and remedies that exist at the state level for the tenants, yeah.
Okay, so a tenant who's illegally evicted has the right to take civil action against a landlord and collect harm created by that eviction. And my question is, the $100 doesn't seem like a large enough fine.
So yeah, so it's specifically.
So the purpose of this might be to, I assume, to kind of encourage or discourage illegal evictions, and adding another tool to the toolbox, so to speak, of what can be done, and giving the city the authority to also take action in addition to the individual who may or may not feel like pursuing civil action due to time constraints and all these other issues that may come up. Am I right? Okay.
Yes, exactly.
So then the city can then take action on their behalf, and so then a person would file a complaint and say, hey, there's been an illegal eviction. Their complaint is filed with the city?
Yes.
Where does that get filed?
So that the criminal complaint could be filed with if a police officer, of course, is being called in to report, and then or else at any police station, as far as a general reporting would go.
And then the police. So the complaint is with has to be filed with the police department.
Yes.
Okay. And then a police officer then writes a report and says, this is an allegation of an illegal eviction.
Yes.
And then in the same way you might get fined for illegal dumping or something of that nature in a municipal sense, then this comes before a municipal court? Okay.
Yes, a very similar process, at least is what we understand it to be.
And this is a new fine, am I right?
Yes.
Does this fall under a Hancock provision that would require a vote, since it's a new fine?
I'll just testify that that's beyond my knowledge at this moment, but I don't believe so, yeah.
Oh, okay, sure. Have other cities implemented similar?
Yes. Not most recently, but most specifically, Chicago is the one that I know we looked at in depth, and that is a provision that has worked very well for Chicago.
And do they what does their fine look like?
If I remember, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's slightly more substantial as far as the money amount goes, although I don't think that much more.
Okay.
Because it's a municipal offense there too, ultimately, so it's limited to whatever their charter has as that too.
Okay, and then the charter here restricts us to this amount.
To 100 to 500.
By city charter, so we can't implement a higher fine.
At this point, yes.
It was once on the ballot to be able to take it up to 1,000.
To take any municipal fine up to 1,000? Okay.
Some years ago, it was on the ballot.
Okay. Do you have any estimations of how many illegal evictions take place in the city in a given year?
So first, I would state that it's a very difficult statistic to capture because it's by nature extrajudicial. So that's something that we can't look at the court process for, and because police are inconsistent in how they are dealing with it, it's not necessarily going to fall into all police reports. But for us, we've seen 33 in the last year, and that's in our group of about 600 to 700 tenants that we've interacted with in the region. So we're talking about 1 in 20 of each people we talk to about any issues. That can be repairs, evictions, discrimination issues has some illegal lockout. So I would say it is a disarmingly common issue in St. Louis. And I'd say the other thing too is that because of the type of renting, the level of renting at which it occurs, which is going to be mostly at the lower end of, not exclusively, but at the lower end of the market.
Mhm.
It's also in areas that don't receive significant media coverage for what's going on there. And it also, I think, I would testify to, involves populations that have a certain possible distrust for the police, and then when the police aren't aware of their own role in it, that has had issues as well.
So then you speak to my next question, which is, or what my next comment was going to be, and that is related to the complaint having to go through the police department. Is there a mechanism by which a complaint can be made to the building division or to the city and directly without involving the police? My concern would be that if you have outstanding warrants or if you have other issues in your household that, or illegal status or things of that nature that may discourage you from initiating contact with the police department. That since this is a municipal violation, it could be something like high grass, for example, or something else. So that, is there a way to eliminate or to go around needing to communicate directly or to engaging the police department and going through a city agency?
So I do not know specifically about that. My feeling would be that that could be done because we are in the we have interacted with the building department and other departments in the city to file complaints about all sorts of housing issues, and I'd imagine that you probably could too, but I don't want to step out too far in saying I don't know exactly what that process would look like from a practical point of view.
Well, my concern would just that the allegation, or excuse me, the complaint is necessarily going through the police department, and my concern would be that if you have a compromised situation in the household, a warrant, illegal immigration status, or some other issue that would maybe discourage the members of the household from actively engaging with the police department, is there a way to file a complaint of an illegal eviction through a city agency that is outside of the police department, for example, the building division, or I'm thinking off the top of my head, because it's a municipal violation and like a long high grass or some other.
I imagine that an inspector from the building division could investigate it as they do with conditions inside a house or high grass outside of a house. I don't believe there's anything that would limit their authority to likewise assert that there has been a violation and then recommend that to a city councilor for the proper.
But there would be a city ordinance in place.
I think that, I believe that's right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does this empower them to do that?
Well, they are empowered to uphold the laws related to that, so it could be.
Yes. Now, of course, at some level, there'd probably be need to kind of push that into their procedures in a more
Right. I
formal
think they might
way.
need to be compelled to accept complaints of that nature.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's right. I think that could happen at kind of the regulation level for them. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, just to respond to the Alderman from the 20th, I think the concern is that, there are people who don't respect the building division or the inspectors, and they get fines and citations. They're thrown into housing court. They don't show up and all that kind of stuff. And since this seems to be more of a criminal activity, the police issuing a summons is the only way. Personally, I'm not a lawyer. I play one sometime, but I think that's the only way to get them in a criminal system is if they actually have a summons by the police.
So this this enables a police officer to issue a summons for illegal eviction?
Yes.
Okay.
And it gives more teeth to it because people are more afraid of what the police may do if they don't comply than the building division or building inspector. Okay, are you finished? I'm not trying to rush you.
That's okay.
Make sure I don't
Thank you.
keep moving.
No, I think think that does it for my questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Alderman Boyd.
No.
You have someone else?
We do. We have just a few others. Rakisha Thomas. You come up. Just give a little bit about her experience. She doesn't have a long testimony, but
I was like, shit, I'll be
she's not going to be long.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my nightmare that I went through with a landlord. First of all, my rent was paid up in full. I was going to be late for the next month. And I went to a sleepover, and I came home, and I was locked out. A padlock on my front door, and my daughter had to go to the bathroom, and she peed on herself. So I called the police to get back into the house. The police came, and they told me that there's nothing they can do about it because it's a civil matter. So I was end up homeless. So I have to figure out somewhere to go for the night. So I went to my mother's house. My kids missed out on school. All our things are in the house. Our uniforms, our clothes. I was all the way in South County. And my kids were in school in the city. So I found out, if I called me a lawyer, and the lawyer told me to go into the apartment. And then I went to the apartment, got my stuff at the apartment. The landlord came with a gun, and he put out a gun on us, and then he got arrested. That's my story.
Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you coming down.
Thank you. Okay, Rob. And then we have just one other. Would you identify?
Hi, Robert Swearingen. I'm an attorney with Legal Services of Eastern Missouri. And thank you, Rakisha, for coming up and telling us a very abbreviated story about what happened to her. But it's illustrative of almost all of the cases that I've handled in the last 2 or 3 years, which is dozens of people who are locked out of their apartment and who are forced to basically scramble to find some place to live. Some of them live in their cars. Some of them are crowded into their friends' and families' apartments, which basically violate those leases. But they have to find a place to live because their landlord couldn't take the time to follow the judicial process, which is there to provide a safe and orderly way for evictions to take place. This has been the law and the policy in Missouri. When we talk about the civil law, the civil policy in Missouri since the late 1800s has been you must go to court, use the judicial system before you separate somebody from their home and everything that they own. That's the way we do it. It's the way it's always been done. There are a few rogue landlords in St. Louis. The vast majority of landlords follow the law. They use the court system, which ensures public safety and protects people and their property. What happened to Rakisha is not unusual. Often, the first thing my clients tell me is, I came home, the electricity was off, the gas was off, the water was off, I have no heat, I have no lights. The first thing they do is they call the police. The police want to help. The police will come out. In the vast majority of the cases that I have, my clients call the police come out, they want to do the right thing, they call the landlord, and the landlord says, I'm not doing anything about it, I don't care, and the police have to say these words, it's a civil matter. That's exactly all they can say. They want to do the right thing. Talk about improving police and community relationships. You give the police the opportunity to tell that landlord that you just illegally evicted somebody, you're about to make them homeless. And that's the kind of things that they want to do for the community. Look, there are people that don't pay their rent, but there are other reasons why people get illegally evicted. Sometimes it's because they're making complaints about the conditions of the property. Sometimes it's because the property is condemned, because there's no occupancy permit or because the conditions are so horrible. And when you make a complaint, a retaliation by the landlord can be to lock you out. Come home and imagine everything you own has been taken from you. Everything you own. I've had people that couldn't get their medications that they need to survive. This is truly a public health issue. This is the committee that it needs to be in. And I think that this will do quite a bit to allow the police to intervene and stop it from getting worse and stop people from becoming homeless. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate you coming down.
Just one other, and that's Jeanette Mott, Oxford, former state representative.
Jeanette Mott, Oxford from Empower, Missouri. Alderman Boyd and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm usually in Jefferson City instead of here, but we've been working with EHOC and Legal Services and other concerned folks for some time about this issue. I have some written testimony that was passed out to you earlier that shows that affordable housing is already a crisis in our state. We need over 125,000 more units just for extremely low-income people, not other poor folks. And you need $15.67 an hour to rent a modest two-bedroom apartment in our state by the HUD fair market rates. So when a person is illegally locked out, they have a real hard time finding somewhere else to be that they can get into, especially since usually there's kind of a hitch about maybe their security deposit is tied up somewhere else, and managing to get a deposit and get in is very, very hard. We would like police to know that they can help people and to be trained in that because often they do give out information that's not correct. We think that this would give greater stability to families with low incomes. Housing insecurity, homelessness is what's called an adverse childhood experience and causes trauma and toxic stress in children, which impacts on their brain development. So it's in everyone's interest for us to solve this problem. This doesn't do everything that needs to be done about affordable housing in our state, but it certainly is a step in the right direction around a particular problem, which is illegal lockouts.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming down.
That completes all we have for any testimony.
Okay, let me just see if anyone have any additional questions for the sponsor, Alderman Vaccaro.
No
Alderman Arnowitz.
No question.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
No question.
Alderwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Alderman Boyd. I just have a couple of follow-up questions. Do we require that every tenant has a occupancy permit? Is that correct?
Not in every ward, no.
That is just in districts with housing conservation in place?
Mm-hmm.
Do we require landlords to provide any information to tenants as a city, as a policy?
I don't believe there may be some in a conservation district.
How many?
None there either? No. It's none.
How many districts are not under housing conservation? Do we know that?
It may be 2 or 3 wards.
Two or three wards?
Yeah, that are not.
And it's by ward boundary?
It was, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of ways to get information like this out to people and educate tenants of their rights and to know that this would exist to protect them.
To be a little bit more accurate, when they initially did the conservation districts, in many ways they were done either by neighborhood or by ward. And so then after that, they were done by ward. But under redistricting, some of that changed. So there are some wards, some portions of it is in the conservation district and other portions are not, to give you a clearer picture.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Alderman Muhammad.
No question.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
Okay. For the record, I'm a landlord, been one for about 27 years. Evictions are something I never look forward to. They're very painful. But I do appreciate landlords that do the right thing because right comes back to you. I have known people to do illegal evictions. I've heard real ugly stories in my ward. I've had constituents call me about issues which I can't get involved in as an alderman, but it's good to know that we're putting something on the books that actually give, police a little more authority. There has been cases where I've known police have called the landlord and they did come back and put the door on or whatever they did to try to do an illegal eviction. So I think this is really moving us in a progressive move. And I'll make a motion that we pass Board Bill 87 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Then moving to second. Okay, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Cone. Alderman Arnowitz.
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Spencer.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd. Aye. Chairman Kennedy.
Aye.
8 aye votes.
Thank you.
Pass.
Members of the committee, Vice Chairman.
If we could, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to do 128 first.
128? That's Board Bill 1?
Board Bill 128.
I'm trying to find it. Okay.
Okay. And I have our attorney here too, just in case there's a lot of questions that I can't answer.
Surely.
But what this does, it's the second step in what I've been trying to do within our jail system. It seems like sometimes people are not treated fairly. And what this does, it sets up a commission or a group that they can talk to. It's an oversight board. At some point, I'd really like it backed up with an attorney through the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency. But for right now, and I'm probably going to ask Lou where was that, to explain the breakdown of, but it would consist of people that actually have been to jail. It's a whole group of people so that we can get a pretty fair assessment if someone, because there's stories of people that go into the jail and they're denied their medicine and they need it. There's people that rights have been violated or been treated poorly, and this would address that. So I would open it up for questions, but I would also ask Lou to maybe help me with a lot of the questions.
He'd ask you to step up and say a few words about it. Go right ahead.
So, Lou, you want to explain how we break down how we come up with the committee, actually, how it's picked and how we chose?
Right.
It was through another state that does.
Right. So this was copied off or cribbed off of some other states that have similar bodies. It's organized where the Board of Aldermen Committee on Public Safety would make appointments to the committee, a certain number of appointments to the committee, which would be approved by a vote of the Board of Aldermen. The other appointments would be made by the mayor, then approved by the Board of Aldermen. Once the committee is established and then going, the committee would also be able to, members of the committee would then be able to appoint members and then have them approved by the Board of Aldermen. The members, or the composition of the committee with the membership, the different members on the committee would be required to have expertise in different areas that concern detention facilities. One of them would be a medical member. Another one would be a mental health member. Another member would be a correction professional, so that you would have a committee with experience in the critical matters or in critical areas of the operation of these types of facilities.
The only thing that we may add it here or add it later, it was suggested maybe we should try and find someone who's been in the facility to also be included as one of the people that would be on that oversight committee. Because there's a lot of people that go there that are not guilty of anything, and certainly their perspective on how they were treated would be valid. So that would be the only thing I would like to add to this. We could do it as an amendment, just to add, what line is it on, where it's got the breakdown?
So the membership?
Yeah.
So the types of members are the qualifications of the members. That starts at Section 2, composition and membership.
Page
2 of 10.
Okay, so page 2 of 10, line.
So you would add an additional member?
Yeah, we would add one additional member. So I think under the composition,
so that
professional member, we would add to line 18, page 3, line 18, I believe it would be added.
No, you could.
No.
Page 4, line 3.
Page 4, line 3. That's why I got Lou next to me. Page 4, line 3, and it would just simply say someone who's been a detainee or in the jail. however we would word that.
So it would be.
Page 4?
Well, yes, page 4, line number 3, that is the line that would begin the next, after the social work professional member. So that would, if Alderman Vaccaro wants to include another member, that's where I would include it.
So line 2 then, right after this, it wouldn't be line 3.
Well, that, line 2, right after line 2, right? So it would start at line 3.
Not on the one I'm looking at.
1, 2, 3, or 4. Right before disqualification, that's when you
Page
add.
4, line,
3, that's where it would be.
yeah, page 4, line 3.
Yeah,
That's blank.
Right, but
That's where
that's
you
where,
would
that's
put
where
it.
the next section would begin.
right.
So,
Oh, okay, there'd be a whole new section.
right, so there would be another section, or not another section, but another paragraph added to cover membership for a person who has been in a detention facility. So that would actually also add an additional member to the committee too. So, or we
Go
can
from 9
reduce
to
them.
10.
What?
So go
So we
from
go
9
from 9 to 10.
Right,
Okay.
unless the committee's reduced.
That was the only change that I had in it. So other than that, we'd be open for questions.
Yeah, we can go ahead and open it up for questions. Alderman Arnowitz, any questions? And Alderman Boyd is here. We'll go to.
He's over here.
Oh, it's 2 of them over here talking. Okay, then. Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions?
And I was just skimming through, so it's a 10-member.
Yeah, well, it wasn't, but we 10 if we had the other position. And it would address anyone that feels they were mistreated in the jail.
And they'll be,
And we can reduce the committee. If you think 10's too many, we can reduce it.
and they'll serve 3-year terms, or?
No, it's various. It's various.
One was 3, then
The
rest-
additional members of the committee will be, the initial committee will be appointed for different terms so that they're staggered.
Okay.
All right, so that not the entire committee isn't being changed every 3 years.
Right.
So that's what would stagger the committee. So a portion of the committee would be appointed for 1 year, and I think that the other portion is 3 years.
And who will appoint? The mayor will appoint based on the public safety committee recommendation, or how is that structured? I was just reading it, so I'm
Right, so there's 2 mechanisms for appointment for the initial committee. One would be that the Public Safety Commission makes recommendations for appointment, all right? And then those would go to the Board of Aldermen for a vote. The remaining members of the initial committee would be recommended by the mayor and then go to the Board of Aldermen for a vote. After the committee turns over, all right, then the committee members will be able to appoint or be able to nominate 3, which would go to a vote by the Board of Aldermen. The mayor would be able to nominate 3, which would go to a vote of the Board of Aldermen, and then the public safety would be able to nominate 3. But this would change if another committee member was added.
Better we could leave it at 9 and drop one of the other.
And what would the vetting process look like? I know it's some specifics on, like, you couldn't have been elected, during a certain time frame, this, that, and the other. But what would that vetting process look like to get?
Well, we've done it here before. So usually, once we pick, a group, because you might have 20 people that you're looking at, we brought them in to public safety before and talked to them, got a little bit about their background, and then we actually picked from a group. And we did that on the oversight committee for the police. The only thing different, again, at some point, we need an attorney that is not tied to the upstairs, not tied to the mayor's office, but actually working for these folks that are in jail. And they could use this committee, this attorney could be used in this committee, without getting into a big whatever, but I really think, I'm on CREA, the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, and I believe strongly that they need an attorney. And I believe that this could fall under that. That's going to be my next step. I keep doing this in stages so that we can get this right, because, again, we have, even when you get down to the ones that are over the police, the civilian, there's no attorney, there's nobody, nothing to back anything up here, so, but we gotta go in steps. So my first step is to, you know, I went through the facility, I got a firsthand look, I listened to what a lot of people said, and then I went and saw the jail. I don't know who I went on that tour, I know Terry was there, but I got a little bit of different perspective, and I saw a little truth in all the different sides, and I do feel that the people that are getting mistreated are, you know, I mean, when you get somebody that's been beat up, and I don't know if he died or not, I think they were suspected he was going to die, and you get people that hang themselves because when they go in, they're not allowed to have their medicine because the policy there is you can't have medicine, you can't bring in, even like me where I'm diabetic, it could be a life or death thing, yet they would not, until their doctors do their own review and make a decision, I could be dead, and that happens there, way more than it needs to happen. I think in last year, I believe there was at least 4 or 5 people who either died or killed themselves in jail, and nobody's speaking for them. So we need to have somebody that helps, not just another committee that does nothing, but a committee that actually is going to do something to make sure that if people are being taken advantage of, something's done. Simply putting a committee together is only the next step in what we have to do to make this work.
That complete you?
I'm sorry if I'm kidding.
Alderwoman Spencer, any questions or comments?
And I don't have any. I think that I commend your leadership on this. I don't have any questions at this time.
Alderman Mohammed, any questions? No questions. Alderman Boyd?
I guess the only question that I have is, you have this committee, and I'm thinking of Citizen Oversight Board. You have this committee in place, they take the complaints, so what meat do they have to make sure that whatever is complained is followed up and is taken care of? I don't want just the...
Right, so that's what I was saying just a minute ago. We form all these committees, and they're all feel-good committees that have no ability to do anything. But we have to form the committee and then do the next step, which is there needs to be an attorney position that is put into CREA, the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, that would work, because no matter what you're from, whether you're white, black, Indian, Spanish, if your rights are being affected, you're not being treated properly in jail, the Citizens Committee should look at that and say, gee, you know what, you're right, or, you know, maybe you're not right.
So they're going to work in conjunction with this committee? That's what you recommend?
Well, if someone has a complaint, they can talk, then they would go to the committee.
Okay.
That committee then will determine if they were truly mistreated or not. Now, the only way this works is that we've finished the next step, and that's to get an attorney. But and even when you're talking about the oversight board, it's useless without an attorney. I don't care if they have subpoena power. It's useless if somebody doesn't have the ability, because if you're going to count on the upstairs, the city councilor's office, what are they going to do? Go, okay, so you're going to be on the defense, and you're going to be on the prosecution? No, there has to be somebody independent that will speak out and actually work to make a difference. Because again, even if you said, gee, you know, you got subpoena power, what are they going to do with that? Say, okay, now we agree. I mean, you're going to still have to have the next step, and the next step of any of these committees is to have some sort of someone that represents the person. Because when they come back, and I'll just speak on the jail bill, if the committee determines that they were mistreated, you're right, the committee can just come here and say, yeah, they were mistreated, and we can go, that's pretty sad. But we have to get that in place first, And then the next step is obviously we got to get an attorney that can actually file suit if someone's rights are violated.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Boyd? Other question?
Yes, so walk me through how somebody could file a complaint. I'm assuming someone who either got out of jail, was upset, or someone who's currently incarcerated. How would that process work?
Well, I mean, if there's an ordinance in place, the way would see it, they would go to whoever at the jail and maybe we can give them whatever, but they would have the right. So that committee could actually go to the jail on a weekly basis or as needed to actually address and listen to the issues. Because some of the issues, and for those of us that went through the jail, there was supposed to be mold and mice and all kinds of terrible stuff. But we went through and it wasn't as bad as what we thought. So you gotta have to have a group that's smart enough to listen, because some things are bad.
No, what I'm asking is,
Well,
what's the formal process of filing a complaint, I guess?
Yeah, I'm gonna let, because.
Right.
Okay.
So it does require that a complaint process be established. The complaints would be able to be sent to both this commission and then also to the Division of Corrections.
Okay, what section are you in?
So it's under duties. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hold on a second. So if you go to page number 6,
okay,
line 17, section 4, commission duties.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. And then that's where that section begins. And then if you go to subsection 4 of that on page 7, that's where it sets forth the commission's duties with respect to creating a process to receive complaints and then review complaints.
Okay. So the commission would set up create this form, and people incarcerated would know what their rights are as far as filing a grievance or complaint.
The process would lay that out. They would submit a complaint, then the committee would have to, or the commission would have to review all the complaints. They would make a determination whether or not they want to investigate the complaint then. And then if they do conduct an investigation, they would make recommendations or would have the ability to make recommendations for changes based on their investigation.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out whose responsibility is it to create the complaint form?
The complaint form, that would have to be the responsibility of the commission. So there's and I'm sorry that I don't know exactly where it is in here, but it says that the commission shall create a process for receiving complaints.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Just so you know, I want to thank our attorney, who's been really good, because I write stuff on a napkin, and he's been really good about helping me put this together.
He didn't let it get called.
Now, but there are some changes that need to be made in it. Correct?
If the committee wants to add if the flavor of the committee is to add someone that's been incarcerated to that committee, then we can do that. Well, actually, I can have Lou do that and come back with the amendment like in 20 minutes, because I still got my other thing we got to do. Or we can hold this over to the next meeting and have the committee sub.
Yeah, I would say let's do that. Because actually you have to change it in more than one place then.
I would have to change it in more than one place, and I believe the alderman would like to have a section in there requiring support from the civil rights.
So those are two different changes.
Well,
then we'll just hold it over.
And I'm fine with that. And then if we can get that together, and then we'll get it out next week.
We'll have another meeting next week, so we'll try to put it on the agenda.
We can have it done.
Okay. All right. Then that will complete our hearing. We're going to hold this in place right now.
Right.
128, and we'll go to your Board Bill 97. Everybody, we're holding Board Bill 128 for the changes. And we're going to Board Bill 97. Then the only other agenda item is the RFP for Prop S.
So I would like to, and I don't know if they put it on everybody's desk, but it would be as amended. Board Bill 97 as amended, and I don't know, hopefully it's on everybody's desk.
Everyone should have Board Bill 97 as amended before us. Let's do a motion just to put it before. There's an amendment after that?
I didn't get a chance to look at it. It was handed to me during
Okay.
the other part.
So amendment number 1 is in addition to this, what's already in
Okay, because it was
97.
handed to me while we were in the other meeting. I have not even had a chance to look at it.
Oh, okay, all right. Gotcha.
So, and again, I have not read this, so it'd be page 1, line 11. After the words submitted to the Excise Commission, insert the following words, and it's, everybody has it in front of them. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to put amendment number 1 to Board Bill 97 before the committee.
Is there a second? Second. Been moved and seconded to adopt amendment number 1 to Board Bill 97
and
for discussion. Well, no, this is for, did you actually made a motion to?
So I have to put it before us. But
To put it before
I
us?
can amend the motion to.
Then amend your motion.
Okay, I'd like to amend my motion to say, I recommend adoption of amendment number 1 to Board Bill 97.
Can we hear it?
This is the amendment.
Do we have anything? Just put it.
Just putting it in here so we can discuss.
everybody should have it. It's basically
not a-
what you handed me.
Yeah, we're not adopting the board bill, just putting this amendment inside of it so we can discuss it
This
in
is-
this form.
This is what you handed me, which, about the municipal violations.
Okay? You following it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Request
been
for
moved.
previous roll.
Any opposition to previous roll? No opposition to previous roll. By your vote, we've adopted amendment number 1 to Board Bill 97. So that puts us to Board Bill 97 as amended.
Okay, so basically, what this does, and the reason this came about was when UGAS came into my neighborhood, they changed to mobile on the run. It was a place that had no problems, no issues, and no reason to have to make them go through plat and petition, although we did. And it just seems like if a business is trying to come in, like Walgreens, when Walgreens was up there, they didn't make them go through plat and petition. When there's multiple stores, they let it kind of go through. But I'll speak to the UGAS. We had one gas station that had no problem getting plat and petition, but took us almost 8 weeks by the time we did the whole process. And in the county, that same company, UGAS, did 32 in 1 day. And didn't even have to, they didn't even basically even have to show up. There was a hearing, which after you do plat and petition, there's always a hearing. What this does, it says if a business has been operating and you sell your business and you haven't been a nuisance property, it's still going to go to a hearing, so everybody still has that same right to come in and say, gee, we don't want this to have a liquor license. It just eliminates plat and petition. So you don't have to go out and re-get all the signatures. But if you've been a bar, restaurant, or liquor store, and you had violations, because that's what we just added, municipal violations in the last 2 years, then, you'd have to go through plat and petition and everything. But what it's saying is good, the Marriott, they change ownership a lot. I mean, different hotels change who their board of directors are, who the ownership is. And, if they have to keep going out for plat and petition every time, it's discouraging. If the ownership again, in my experience was with UGAS, when the city of St. Louis takes roughly 8 to 10 weeks, excuse me, and the county can do 32 of them in 1 day, it was just time to relook at this. Now, if you're a new business coming in, you follow all the plat and petition. If you previously have not had a liquor license, you still go through plat and petition. But all this does is, if you're a good owner, that you still have to have a hearing, so the people still have the right to come and voice an opinion, but you don't have to go through plat and petition, which would actually speed up the process.
Questions from members of the committee? Alderman Boyd?
Not at this time.
Okay. One of which stepped out. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Well, not really a question, but just a comment. I understand, like, if there are multiple businesses, like you mentioned, a Walgreens or something like that, then it can be cumbersome, but the reason I'm in opposition to this board bill is for the simple fact that I feel like when we start taking the neighbors out of it, the people who actually have to live by these establishments, then I think that's when we're kind of sliding down a slippery slope. I mean, although they may be able to come to a hearing and, you know, voice their opinions, well, in my situation, in my ward, we have a lot of residents who aren't engaged. Although they know that this business may be a eyesore, it may be, you know, a problem for the community. They may or may not be on a nuisance list, but, you know, if they aren't actually courted to have to offer their signature, then someone can slip through the process. And whereas this just may be a worst case scenario, but I think I could foresee that happening in several situations within my ward. And people have to live by these businesses, then I think that, you know, although it may slow things down some, but I think that we should keep the people involved in that process of gathering the signatures. And if they can come down and testify for or against it, then that's their wish. But I know a lot of members in my community, they aren't engaged in that way. They may not be able to take off work to come down and voice their opinion. So I think it's good to keep them involved in the process.
And I appreciate that, but this, right now, and depending on your neighborhood, if you're in a neighborhood that, and I don't have this, but if you're in a neighborhood that has a lot of vacant properties, the only ones that count are the vacant properties because they throw all the LRA properties out. If they're city-owned, they don't count. So a lot of times in certain areas, anybody can get a liquor license because, you know, they're just not. This expands, instead of being in that 320-foot circle or whatever that is, this expands it out to a neighborhood because they'll post the meetings, and it expands it way beyond that. I mean, if you look at some of those plats, you know, there's like almost like, if you're in an industrial area, it's a handful of businesses, hardly no residents. And again, it only takes in consideration the people in the small area from the front door. It's either 320 or 350 foot around in a circle. So, I mean, I'm not trying to get you to change your mind. I'm just saying that, you know, in some areas, what you're going to find is anybody can get a liquor license because if you're within the petition circle, and if everything close by there, or the biggest percent of it's LRA property, or, you know, I mean, it gets pretty easy. But
in my ward, it's not easy at all. I mean, we have boards with an 11 o'clock closing condition on there, so it's not easy. And even for those parcels that are possibly owned, it's like if it's industrial or something, they have to go out of their way, which I think is only fair to you know, find those owners and get those signatures. So, you know, I understand what you're saying. I'm definitely pro-business, but at the same time, I think we need to keep the residents engaged.
I appreciate that.
Alderwoman Spencer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the intent of this, and I really appreciate the sponsor's willingness to hear the amendment and include that where we're looking at whether or not a property's been on the nuisance list. And as I sit here and think through this, one thing I remember is that whenever a business wants to get a liquor license in the 20th Ward, I require that they come before the neighborhood associations, they come before the business association, and those communities weigh in. And even if they want to change the provisions of their liquor license, for example, to offer packaged liquor or something of that effect, and the community, not only in the radius, can weigh in through the petition, but that the organized bodies of citizens who participate in public dialogue participate. And so I'm hesitant to vote on this without talking to the business community that I represent and the neighborhood associations and asking for their input on kind of changing this process, just because I think it would I can think of concerns that the community might have if we sort of eliminate them. And so I would ask that we have an opportunity to speak to our various organized bodies before voting on it. And that's my request, just to give a little more time to it before I feel comfortable voting on this change.
Maybe like
I don't
couple
know.
weeks or something.
Couple weeks, I mean.
I'm not opposed to that. We've been waiting to hear this anyway, and that's been my fault. I'm not opposed to that, but let's go through the questions, and I'm not opposed to everybody getting, because it's certainly going to affect whether people are mad at or not mad or.
Well, we can finish up.
Yeah, that's what I would like to. And then come back.
Right.
When we come back, rather than a lot of discussion, I think we can do an up or down.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more question?
Mm-hmm.
The petition process, there's an application fee, and and how much does that cost? $350 or something like that?
I don't even know if it's that much. I don't know the cost. Oh, you know the cost?
You have to pay for the plat, and you have to pay for.
Yeah, I mean, I know for a fact when you pay to have a plat run, it's over $1,000.
No,
Companies
but I
charge
think
you.
I wouldn't think it'd be more than 300, but I can check with liquor control.
Well,
I'll have an answer by next time.
One other thing I think might be helpful is, as we do think through this is, I would hate to see a business continue to just change hands ad nauseum, 10 times, and kind of hand over the liquor license. So it may be useful to put in some limitation on the number of times it could change hands, but I do hear.
Understand we have the excise commissioner here.
Is he?
Perhaps you can come forward and answer that question.
Actually, Miles. That's our new excise commissioner. But then.
Which I don't believe we have.
Put the mic down.
Here you go, Miles. Yeah, me and Miles are.
All right, that's all right. I read Alderman Vaccaro's proposal. I understand now, since he talked about it a little better, what it's about. I thought it was a little bit vague. I think that the one thing you have to keep in mind with the liquor industry, it's a 3-tiered licensing system. There's manufacturers, which includes a primary American source for liquor that would be imported from another country, wine, scotch, various bourbons. And then the wholesaler, they're also tightly regulated to avoid any kind of pressure they would put on a retailer or any kind of antitrust monopolies that they could create by just restricting their sales to certain retailers. And then on the retailers, you really do have to have complete transparency, because that is where you get the everyday public safety issue with the average person in terms of the ownership. And once you get into the actual licensing of a place, if it's not tightly regulated, then you're going to get into it provides a natural segue to the corollary vice offenses, which would be illegal gambling, drugs, any myriad of prostitution, any myriad of things that could be going on, and frequently do in a place that is not regulated. But that having been said, I agree with Alderman Vaccaro. I've been here about 2 months. I think it's a very cumbersome system that exists in the city. You have to have a plat before you get a license, a petition. The neighbors have to approve you. Later on, if they don't like you, then they can file another petition to take your license away. So in my view, the initial petition is almost a prior restraint of a business owner to open a business in the city. And I can tell you, I know of 2 situations where people have gone elsewhere because of that particular situation, of being so difficult. And it is expensive. I don't have the exact figures right in front of me, but I think the gentleman that said it's about $1,000. It's not far from that. to even, the petition, yeah.
I know that the companies charge quite a
Yeah, but each license has a different fee attached to it.
That's not true. No, each license is separate.
Right.
And so the application fee is not $1,000.
No, but I mean, when you go through the petition process, it can get rather expensive.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, go right ahead.
It can get, if you pay somebody, well, these companies out there, if you want them to run everything for you, but we're talking about the money that's paid to the Excise Commission for application.
Yeah, they have a
Initial
license
application.
fee application.
Right.
Then
How much is
You
that?
have to pay for the license. I believe that's about $400.
Okay, and then a license. Well, I guess you add both of them. Okay. I wasn't adding both of them. I see what you're saying. The application fee plus the license fee, you could get to $1,000.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I thought you meant the application fee.
No.
Okay.
The city is only allowed by statute to charge 1.5 times what the state charges. And I might add, this is the cheapest state in the union to operate a liquor establishment.
I believe we had, Alderman Spencer, you were asking questions. Did we complete you?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's my understanding that it is fairly inexpensive compared to other places in the country. And even though there may be some cumbersomeness, in other cities, New Jersey and other states, it can be $10,000 or more, and there's a restriction on number of licenses, and so we're fairly liberal in handing out liquor licenses.
I mean, but here's
in my understanding.
just an example. Walgreens, I guess was 3 years ago roughly, maybe 2 years ago, changed ownership. I'm sorry. 2 or 3 years ago, Walgreens changed ownership. And whether right or not right, I know that we have Walgreens in our neighborhood, and I was talked to by previous administration saying, look, we'll just have the meeting, and they did not make each individual Walgreens go through plat and petition. And if they would have, that means every Walgreens would have had to go out. Now, during the petition process, our neighborhood organization had set forth a bunch of rules for the one Walgreens in our neighborhood that were honored.
We need to, there's another hearing in here.
Oh, okay.
So we're then at the, Alderman,
we're fine to...
Alderman Muhammad, did you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, do you support the ordinance?
Not the way it's currently written.
Okay.
I would like some more details in terms of what kind of...
Can you got to get the mic in front of you.
I would like some more specifics in terms of how the application, and I guess in my view, there should be an application, even if it's just between two people, submitted for the licensing, and a provision in that particular ordinance for the fee, which I imagine would remain the same.
Gotcha. Thank you. Alderman.
And I would agree to that.
So,
I would agree to that.
thank you. Alderman, so your bill, to me, makes it harder for someone to obtain a liquor license. And I think that would hurt my neighborhood that has no economic development and nothing but, a few gas stations along Natural Bridge. But if someone wanted to open up a bar or a night spot in my ward, they would have to go through this long, drawn-out process.
The process...
I'm not finished. They would have to go out through this long, drawn-out process that you have of not transferring a liquor license, reapplying for a liquor license, which we all know is a headache already. I think that this will hurt business growth. And again, I don't support liquor, giving out liquor licenses, but I do support businesses, and most of my businesses cannot survive without liquor. So I think this just hurts it.
No, so, for instance, this takes one step out. Now, if it's a new store...
No, it doesn't.
It does. Because right now...
Replace the step. You didn't take a step out. You just replaced the step.
Right now, if you're going to get a liquor license, like say but it's not one that's there right now. You have to do plat and petition, so you have to get signatures. Then there's a public hearing, and then it's decided, whether or not there would be a liquor license. What this says, if it already exists, then if you already have a liquor license now, say one of the liquor stores or service stations in your ward now, let's just say they change ownership. Rather than make the new owner, which makes it really hard to sell your business, have to go through plat and petition, the hearing process, and all the steps, it becomes very expensive, because you got the liquor license, which we'll put back in, which will still be the $400, but then you got to pay a company probably $1,000 or $1,200 to go out and get the signatures. So what this does, it just says if you're already a good operator of a business,
We're still holding it, so
we're going to still hold it,
to go over this.
but I don't know if you understood, or if you want to talk after the meeting.
They
But
probably
right
do.
now, if a new company or somebody wants to open a business, even if it's a grocery store, it's real cumbersome in order to get the ability to sell liquor.
Alderman Boyd, did you have any?
No.
Thank you.
Alderman Boyd has a commentary. Then we have one other item before we go. It won't take long.
Yeah, currently, under the current system, requiring people to go do all these petitions all over is a cumbersome process.
Right.
We have establishments in our communities that already have a liquor store. That is totally different than trying to create and open up a new venue, which certainly people can have anxieties about because it hasn't been there before. They're not sure how it's going to operate. But if you have an establishment that sells liquor in your community, and they're whether they're a good establishment or a bad establishment, if they want to sell and transfer, it should be a seamless process, and we should be a business-friendly city. Now, the petition process is a 360-degree circle drawn around the front door. There are people inside neighborhoods that have no voice whatsoever in signing that petition. They could be totally against it, but if you don't live in the 360 circle, you don't matter. So all the stuff about we taking power away from neighborhoods and so on and so forth is not necessarily all the way true, because there's only a certain group of people who have to sign to begin with. And we're not taking the power away from anybody. What you're doing is eliminating the step. And let's give you a scenario. You have a very bad owner, has a very bad liquor store, has a lot of problems. That person wants to sell. You have two options. You have a hallelujah moment where they can sell to somebody that cleans that place up and transforms it, and they're a good, citizen in the neighborhood, or you're stuck with this bad operator. And I've seen situations personally in my ward where, people want to resist the new person because they have an attitude about the current person, which you're not giving somebody else an opportunity, because this new person could be a phenomenal operator and they'll be good for the neighborhood. But what I find that constituents don't do, where all their power is, they don't protest. The upper hand is always with the community, because they can protest for free, if I'm not mistaken, right, Mr. Commissioner? So if you want to apply for a liquor license, you have to pay a $400 application fee or whatever it is. If you don't get the signatures, too bad. The $400 is gone. You don't get refunded back. But if you want to protest, it's free to the public, because we are on the constituents and the resident side. They go get their signatures. If you're not going to protest a bad operator, why would you want to protest someone who can potentially be a good operator? And it doesn't take the voice away, because it's my interpretation that you would send the postcards out to everybody, letting them know what's going to happen. So at that time, they can say, hey, look, write the commissioner. They can do whatever they need to do to make sure that their voice is heard. They can come to the hearing, and I agree. There are some people that can't make it to the hearing, okay? But if you get 51%, there's still 49% of people that's disgruntled, that said, no, I don't want to sign it. And that's what democracy is about. And I think the city of St. Louis needs to stop being so cumbersome and trying to stop people from doing business with the city, and try to help people do business with the city. If you're not going to exercise your right to get rid of a bad operator, personally, I don't think it's fair that you should try to stop somebody who can potentially be a good operator. And it doesn't stop you from saying, hey, can we have a community meeting with this person? Can we meet with this person? I've only seen in my 14 years being on one time a neighborhood, and it was the people in that particular say, like, can we all have a meeting so we can get an understanding? I've seen where, because I've sat in over half of the licenses, and some of them say, look, we'll support you, but we want to make sure you have cameras. We want to make sure you have all this stuff to address some of the public safety concerns. And so I just want to kind of put that out there. We're not taking anybody's rights away. We're not taking the public's right to be part of the process. They are in the process. But what's unfortunate, if you have a 30-year-old couple that's been operating for a long time and they want to sell their particular business, they're having a hard time and they're struggling to sell it because some people are moved, some people are dead, and you have to prove that people are dead. You have to find out what month, what year, and all this other kind of stuff. It can be very cumbersome for somebody. So if they already have an established license, you're not changing the landscape of how many liquor licenses are in your ward. It's going to have it. If the couple is not able to sell, you're still going to be there. And then people figure out finagle ways to incorporate and change, ways of doing business, and they do it anyway. And I'm not trying to, I know there's somebody else in here, but I think it's important to point out that this is a tough process, period, and it is a privilege to have a liquor license. It's not something that, just have a right and entitled to.
But we'll have more time to discuss it also. You're going to go back and look at
and
things.
we're going to make some changes, and Lou's going to help me, and it'll look really nice. And I would ask, though, if the members of the committee would send me, after you read it, what you would like to see in it, whether you're for or against it, but what you would like to see that might, change your heart somewhat.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. We have only one other agenda item, that is the RFP for Prop S. We discussed it a little bit last week, and so are there any changes to last year's RFP that we'd like to see? Because we need to formally adopt an RFP to be issued for Prop S dollars. We're about $950,000 this year. Am I correct on that?
It's how much? Sure.
How much do we have this year?
The precise
Mm-hmm.
amount, Hodge from the Director of Public Safety's office, it's 953, 193 is the actual total that we have.
193. Okay.
Yep,
Is the total amount, right?
correct.
The request for proposals this year tried to focus on the 15 to 16 neighborhoods that were identified in the peer plan.
Correct.
And so if we could keep that the same. In fact, Alderman Cone asked that we keep that the same because we recognize we need to have multiple year investments in those areas to have an impact.
Absolutely.
Everything else is pretty much boilerplate,
Yep.
other than the time period.
Yep,
Open.
the time period would be the only other change, as well as the contact information. So in the one that you guys, I think, have in front of you, it says that Joshua Kramer is the contact, but it'll actually be me, Rebecca Hodge. And I sent that change to you, but I can resend the document as well.
The contact would be you.
Correct, it would be me, Rebecca Hodge. It'd be the same phone number, but then it would be hodger@stlouis-mo.gov, and that's the last line on the first page for direct questions to contact me.
And we gave 30 days for them to respond last year,
Correct,
from October 1st through the 31st.
correct.
So if we give them 30 days, issuing it this Friday, is that a possibility?
That's absolutely a possibility, and we'll also be putting out advertisements as well, then to advertise it.
So that would take it to like November 10th or so?
I believe so. Yes, it should be November 10th.
So it's due by November 10th.
If we get it, if it's issued this coming Friday.
Correct.
Are we comfortable enough to adopt it that way? The RFP, or do we need more time to think about it? And it's the same RFP as last year, we're just changing the date and the contact.
Yep.
We need a motion.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt the RFP as we discussed it here. Been the request for previous role. Any opposition to previous role? Seeing none, by your vote, we've adopted the RFP. Just make the changes, get it back to us, and we can get it out by Friday.
Absolutely.
All
Sounds
right,
good.
thank you. That completes our agenda for today. We will be meeting next Tuesday.
Just record your vote.
Oh. Good point. I'll record it.
You may have to step in as clerk for a second.
Had to step in. I forgot Donald had to leave out.
The previous rule is just going to be all the same name.
All right, thank you. We're- Our meeting is still adjourned.
Today, I was not really happy on the disrespect for our community